something for a couple things, and then people are making the content through social media posts where essentially they're trying on everything that they're buying from Shein for their followers.
One of those TikTok users says she got 20 items for $180.
Yeah, that sounds like Shein's price point, yeah.
And again, people wear it, they would wear it once and then just throw it away.
Yeah, I think the point of the purchase is to share it with their users because they're using these hauls to sort of like build their following. So what they're doing is trying to engage with their audience by being like, here's the thing that I got, do you like it? And so that kind of accelerates the comments because people are commenting like, keep that one, don't keep that one. And that just gets more attention and viewership for the post.
So it may not even be for wearing out, it might just be for wearing to post online.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, I would say that because we have such a huge like online fashion influencer community that's growing on TikTok, people are using fashion as a way to just kind of audience. And so it doesn't really even become anymore about like where you're going to wear this because the point of purchasing it is to like share it with your followers, with your fans.
How quickly do new styles appear on the app?
Every day, and the company is really good at taking young designers, small designers, trending designers on Instagram and TikTok and basically copying their designs. Sometimes even before the company closed gets to stores, Shein has already created like a, I don't want to say counterfeit, but like a knockoff.
Like a knockoff.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, people have called this algorithmic fashion. It seems like algorithms rule a lot of our lives, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the music that we listen to, the films you might want to watch on your streaming service. What does algorithmic fashion mean to you?
I mean, essentially, like as things start to trend on social media with hashtags, like Depop is a great online app retailer, and they have all these relevant hashtags for their products. So it's like hashtag grunge, hashtag raver, hashtag punk. And so Shein sort of does the same thing where it's like bohemian is trending or cowboy is trending. They'll just produce clothes to feed those social media trends. So people are shopping based on what they're seeing on social media.
Would a company like this exist without something like TikTok, do you think?
Would a company, I mean, yeah, fast fashion has been around before social media. I think what is interesting about Shein, or what makes Shein so successful, is that it's giving people the opportunity to shop and interact with fashion the same way that the celebrities that they follow interact with fashion. Because young people are seeing these, I don't know, like Dua Lipa, for example, like you never see her in the same outfit more than once. So they're seeing their idols constantly wearing clothes that maybe, Versace. And because these people are wealthy, they can afford to buy something for $4,000 or $5,000 and never wear it again. So Shein gives people that same opportunity, or the ability to dress the same way. I think more wise was successful than just it being on social media.
What to you is most interesting about the success of this company and what you have been describing, the velocity of what it's churning out and who it's attracting?
I mean, I think to me it's like it's giving people the opportunity to shop and participate in consumerism the same way that the people that they idolize participate in fashion. But what they're not seeing is that, like, behind the scenes, all of these celebrities and people are buying like luxury designer goods, and they're holding on to them. Like everybody has a real personal wardrobe they wear day in and day out. But for social media, everybody wants to see new clothes constantly. We have this culture where celebrities don't rewear their fashion. And so I think young people are seeing that, and they want to participate in fashion the same way, which is like, I'm going to Coachella, so I want an outfit that I'm going to post and wear, and once I post and wear it, like, I don't need it anymore. So it's a very different approach to retailing, because historically you're really trying to get customers to invest in clothes, and we sell people on this idea idea that you should buy something expensive and special because you hold on to it and wear it for a long time. And what Shein is doing is trying to kind of like break that retail model and just be like, it's fun, just buy it. If you wear it once, it's fine because it's only $4, you know?
Do you think other retailers are going to try and follow it? Given how successful this company is, will other retailers try to jump on that? Are they already trying to do that?
Oh, I don't know if it's possible to do. I mean, how much cheaper can clothes get, honestly? You know, I think it's important to know that, like, once you see these things in person, it's like you wear it once and you flatten it and you wash it, and it's not going to come back to a condition that you are ever going to be able to wear it again.
Because it's made so cheap.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's just too, I don't even want to say delicate because that makes it sound like it's precious, but it's like it comes out of the packaging, you put it on, you wear it, but it's like, I don't know, maybe you'll get like 3, 4, 5 wears out of it. But even something, you know, I have clothes from H&M Zara that have been in my closet for years. Is not that. So I don't know. I don't know that if other retailers are going to approach the business model because it's so dependent on trends and staying up to date with the trend cycle.
Just the last thing, we're going to talk more about how you create clothes that cheaply and some of the backstory around that. But there's a huge environmental footprint to you wearing something once and then throwing it in the bin. Do you think that is of concern to the demographic that this company is targeting, the Gen Z demographic?
I mean, absolutely, because at the same time, you have, like, young people right now have such a huge awareness of climate change, and they want to be able to shop sustainably. There's a lot of people that want to shop vintage, resale, secondhand. Thrift flipping has become really popular on social media, where people go to a Goodwill and come home and they sort of show their sewing projects and how they modify old clothes to fit them. So there's for just as many people that are shopping Shein disposably, I would say that there's tons of people that are trying to shop sustainably. If anything, it's interesting that both of these two things are happening at the same time.
Timothy, it's great to talk to you about this. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course.
Timothy Chernaev is behind the fashion TikTok account Relax. It's only fashion. 20 items for $180, something you wear once and then throw away. You might wonder just how Shein and similar ultra-fast fashion companies are able to make those clothes so cheaply. My next guest can help answer that question. Lucy Siegel is an environmental journalist in the UK. She's looked behind the scenes at how these clothes are made and what happens when they're thrown out. Lucy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How has this company changed the game? You just heard Timothy Chernaev talk about what he sees on social media. From your perspective, how is it changing the game?
Well, it's fascinating hearing some of that gap between reality and social media, which explains why a lot of this pace. But I suppose, for many years, people like me who have campaigned to, first of all, publicize the true environmental and social footprints of the fashion industry overall, we've really had to take a very strong stance against fast fashion and what, of course, Timothy is describing as ultra fast fashion. I think he used that phrase. So in terms of a game changer, we knew things could get bad, and this is the realization of it getting really, really bad and really fast, because the faster and cheaper it gets, the worse the impact is, as a rule of thumb. So I'm definitely not relaxed about fashion.
Okay,
like Timothy's.
Let's talk about how companies like Shein keep prices so low. How do they make those clothes and sell them at a price point? Again, 20 things for $180.
Well, the reality of how cheap fast fashion is produced is that the environmental reality, the footprint is externalized. So none of that is paid for by the brand, which I'll explain a little more in a second. And then the second thing that happens is that production is outsourced usually, although Shein, it may be slightly different because they're based in China and they have some Chinese factories that we know about. But those will be very low wage workers. There's about 101 steps to making a garment, theoretically. to making any garment. And about 6 to 8 of those different steps are when the garment is sewn together and assembled. And traditionally, in fast fashion, in cheap, fast clothing, that is done in garment factories by people who work at cut, make and trim, and they are paid super low wages, and they're amongst some of the most vulnerable workers in the world. So we've just had the 9th anniversary of the Rana Plaza catastrophe in Bangladesh, when a facility collapsed and over 1,000 people were killed. They were part of that process in the fashion factory. The third ingredient, which we see in Shein and we see increasing, is that the fibers used to make the garments are made of synthetic fibers, i.e. plastics, and that is much cheaper to produce because you don't need to wait for cotton to grow and harvest, and you can knock out a lot of the supply chain. So all of that conspires to make things that are very, very cheap for the consumer, but they have a high impact and a high cost, which is being paid and externalized elsewhere.
We asked Shein about their labor practices, and they sent us to their website. They have a code of conduct on the website that all suppliers have to adhere to, and they say they strive to ensure that their vendors and suppliers pay fair wages. Is it possible to make clothing this cheaply and pay people fairly?
I've done extensive studies into the payment of living wage, which is the amount of money that would be needed by a garment worker to be able to support their basic needs. And I cannot find one brand that is paying a living wage. So a fair wage, I would hotly dispute their definition of fair wage.
What happens at the other end of things when somebody wears something once, and as Timothy says, you wash it, it disintegrates, you're not going to wear it again, it ends up in the bin? What do we know about what happens when these clothes are dumped?
Well, these are primarily synthetic or blended fibers, so they're essentially plastic waste. So they become plastic waste. Now, you may hear a lot of talk nowadays about the fact that it can be recycled and circular economy. There is at the moment no means of recycling polyester fiber successfully in the mainstream, and you have to collect the clothes, which is very difficult to do. So these will enter the waste system, and as we know, a lot of waste is dumped, and we see with fast fashion that we found it dumped everywhere, from the desert in Chile to Malaysia to Vietnam to Haiti. All around the world, we are now starting to understand that there are essentially informal landfills or big dumps of fast fashion waste, and when these garments are washed, because they are have high plastic components, they shed tiny fragments of plastic known as microfibers, which then go through. They can't be picked out of water treatment plants, and they go through into the ocean essentially. And this is part of what we call the plastic pandemic. So there's a double hit, if you like. There's the washing, and then there's also the dumping, and both of those involve plastic waste being dumped in places where there isn't the infrastructure to deal with it or collect it. So what you have, just to think of it in a sort of meta sense for a minute, what you actually have is a linear product being pushed out into the marketplace with no plan by Shein or any of these brands for how these are going to be collected and disposed of or recycled. So it's a free pass, because we are in an ecological crisis. We know we've got a climate and nature crisis. We're on the brink of, wholesale destruction. And yet these companies are still allowed to pump out 6,000 new products a day with Shein, according to reports. That's a big free pass that they're getting.
So when you hear the company say, and again, they put out a statement to us saying that they're working to develop garment recycling programs and initiatives to reduce post-consumer waste, your response is?
My response is that that's like carbon capture collection for climate. It's not proven technology. We're all working towards it, but it's dreamland. And what we do now should reflect the reality of what is actually happening now.
Just in the last few minutes that we have, what do you make of the fact that, to Timothy's point, young people, he says in quotation marks, there's a generation of people that are being nudged through social media. to buy these clothes. They're being encouraged, they're seeing things, they want to reflect that. But at the same time, there is, a surge in vintage stores that are thriving. The people are coming back, buying things from vintage stores and showing how they are augmenting them, preparing them, and they're boasting about that on social media as well. Given the footprint of what you've been talking about, what do you want the people who might be influenced by social media to buy these clothes to be thinking about?
It's so cool that, Timothy says that, and it gives me so much hope that there's this repair culture and there's vintage and there's secondhand culture, which is also gaining traction on social media. And then he also spoke about aping celebrities, and he mentioned certain celebrities. I can tell you, they don't buy those clothes, they loan them, they give them back. So maybe the celebrities need to be much more honest about how they look so great in these posts. And I really think that I try not to blame young people on social media, young people shoppers. I never call people consumers if I can help it. We're citizens with agency. But I feel like I want to go to them. Legislation needs to be brought in, and as it is being brought in, and Shein may find themselves on the wrong side of legislation on plastic and greenwash, and that's something to watch out for. But I sort of go cap in hand to young people on social media, and I say, please, I need you to understand that this is an emergency, and I need you to help me. And you can help me by not getting involved in these hauls and not pushing their brand message, because this is a destructive practice. I don't blame you. I see what's happening, but I think just by having a kind of open and honest conversation, we can start to unwrap some of this. And I don't want to demonize young people who just love fashion. I was young once. I used to love fashion. I've been there. So I don't want to demonize them, but I do want their help. And I think I need their help.
Lucy, it's great to talk to you about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lucy Siegelton, an environmental journalist based in London, England. She contributes to The Guardian, Times of London, and the BBC. She's also a broadcaster. This is The Current on CBC Radio 1. My name is Matt Galloway. Last Friday on the program, we talked about the record number of Canadians coming up to retirement age and the potential labor shortage that could cause. Some of the people we spoke with were continuing to work past the age of 65 for a number of reasons, and they were encouraging others to do the same. That struck a chord with our listeners, and so we are joined now by senior producer Karen Marley to sift through some of your mail. Karen, good morning.
Good morning. We heard from so many Canadians who have continued to work after reaching retirement age, but also from many people who are enjoying retirement. We got this letter from Barbara Waldron in Burnaby, BC. COVID pushed me into retirement a little early, though I still do a little paid work part-time and online. For me, however, retirement has opened the doors for new experiences and personal growth. A job may not offer that. I'm enjoying an expanded role as a political, social activist. I'm doing new sports, learning a musical instrument, studying more languages, and making new friends through all that.
We also heard from Allison Murray in Toronto. I'm 70 and still work part-time at a job that I love. I retired 9 years ago and spent the next few years focusing on volunteer projects, which were rewarding, but I decided to step back into the paid workforce because I had skills that were valued and needed. I've continued to mix paid and unpaid work and have what I think is a very fulfilling life. I plan to live this way for as long as I can.
Jamie Campbell, a young listener in Winnipeg, wrote a very passionate letter. I appreciate hearing the perspectives of the guests you had on to speak about this topic. There was one comment that really surprised me. Something like, young people today in their 20s and 30s are going to work into their 70s and 80s because they want to. It has been a long time since I've heard anything so wholly out of touch, and I was honestly taken aback hearing this. I'm in my mid-20s, and the thought that I still may be working 50 or 60 years from now is a nightmare. Neither I nor any of my peers in my age group would agree that we want to still be working when we reach our 70s and 80s. But the sad reality is that we were born at a really inopportune moment and have grown up and entered the workforce amid recession, political upheaval, and now a multi-year pandemic.
David Watts in Fredericton is another writer who is past retirement age. David says, I'm 75, retired, and can barely get by on my meager pension. It's very tough, but the last thing in the world I want to do now is to go back to work. I never once wanted to work, only worked when I had to, because that's what our society demands of us. Working is no pleasure, no matter what your experts claim. At this point in my life, I'm prepared to struggle on with pet food in my future if necessary, rather than start working again.
And then Elizabeth Brown in Guelph, Ontario said, I am prepared to offer my services until I am unable to do so, or until a new opportunity as an extension of my studies takes my attention towards another useful purpose. It's healthy for our children and grandchildren to see their senior family members engaged with purposeful work or volunteering for the community or their families. It can be a positive example of what is to come for them as well. It can change the narrative about the word retirement and foster healthier attitudes about being an older person.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to everybody else who wrote in, and thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Karen Marley, senior producer of The Current, reading through your mail. If you missed the segment, you can find it on our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent. And do get in touch. We read everything that you send us, and some of your letters end up on the radio. Email us, thecurrent@cbc.ca. Well, coming up after your regional update.
We bring love, we bring respect, one plate of food at a time. That's the only way I know how to do it. That's the only way World Central Kitchen knows how to do it.
How to feed the world, from Michelin-starred restaurants to wartime Kyiv. My conversation with Jose Andres, the man on that mission. That's coming up in 90 seconds. My name's Matt Galloway, and you're listening to The Current on CBC Radio 1. Stay with us.
Good morning. Here are the headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. I'm Matt Humphrey. Firefighters and police in Abbotsford are dealing with a large apartment fire. Residents of the building were evacuated. It's not clear if anyone has been injured. The fire is along Cardinal Avenue near Mount Lehman Road. Abbotsford police are asking anyone displaced by the fire to check in at the Matsqui Rec Centre. The cause of the fire has yet to be determined. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says home sales in the region fell in April and returned to more historically typical levels for the month. The April sales were 1.5% above the 10-year sales average for the month, far less than the record-breaking number we saw last year. And officials say Victoria and New Westminster will have their own teams later this year, similar to the one operating on the North Shore. The team respond to incidents involving someone suffering from a mental health issue. It's meant as an alternative to police responding to the calls. The team would consist of mental health experts, among other services. And now the forecast for Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley today, with a chance of drizzle changing to a chance of showers this afternoon. Highs to 14 degrees. Tonight we'll see periods of rain before morning. And tomorrow we can expect more clouds and another chance for showers. Right now you are listening to CBC Radio 1, 690 AM, 88.1 FM.
Hi, I'm Matt Galloway. You're listening to The Current.
Is anything savable in your hotel? Is the kitchen usable?
No, nothing is usable.
Zero.
Zero. We have no power.
Okay.
Generator has dumped over on its side.
But if we get you a generator, that kitchen can be functional.
Yes.
Go.
That's Jose Andres in action. He was in the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian in 2019. And that clip is from a new documentary directed by Ron Howard about Andres and his organization, World Central Kitchen. Jose Andres made his name as a food innovator, working in famous restaurants in Spain and the United States. These days, though, you are more likely to find him in a disaster zone, trying to figure out how to get food to the people who need it the most. The new film about him is called We Feed People. I spoke with Jose Andres over Zoom from the Hot Doc stage in Toronto in front of a live audience.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome and thank you for being here. Where are you today?
I am in Bethesda, in Maryland, in my house.
How often are you at home? I mean, in the course of 365 days, how many days would you actually be at your home?
I love to be in my house. I love to be with my wife. I love to be with my daughters and my friends. So, the last 65 days I've been almost everywhere but my home. But it feels good to be here in my house with all of you.
The amazing thing about the work that you do, and you see this in the film, is that in some ways it seems really simple. People are hungry, you make food, and then you feed them. What's at the heart of what it is that you're trying to do? Is it that simple, those three things? Someone's hungry, you find food, and then you get it to them?
Yeah, it's fairly simple. I mean, I know lately a lot of people are like, man, Wall Central Kitchen or Jose or any other chef or any other, man, they seem to do the impossible in very complicated places. But I would love to tell you that it's complicated, but it's not. I mean, it's over 7 billion people that somehow they manage to cook anywhere. Even in the places that there is a scarcity of food or a scarcity of fuel. The amazing thing about humans is that we are able to overcome any challenge. I mean, that's why we are alive thousands of years later of human evolution. And what we do is, we find the way that we can cook or the way we can make sandwiches. It's always great people. In the worst moments of humanity, remember, the best of humanity always shows up. And the cooking is, to us, for cooks, cooking is the easy part. What we do that I believe is different is that we look for the people in need. One of the happy moments, even in those hard situations for me, that's what I like to do, is getting on the car or getting on the helicopter or in the truck and go to find those communities one by one, bringing food on the first contact and telling them one very simple thing. We find the leaders in those communities and we tell them, we cannot do this without you. But I promise you one thing. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll come back the day after until everything goes back to normal. That's what we do. The cooking, the kitchens, the volunteers always happen one way or another. The food is always there. We bring it with us or we find it locally. And then we find the people in need. But at the end, it's locals taking care of locals. In Ukraine, Ukrainians are feeding Ukrainians. I'm blessed that we have organizations that would allow us to partner with them, empower them, but in the process, they're empowering us to do our best possible job, which is bring food to the hungry and bring water to the thirsty. That's it.
Tell me about Ukraine and the work that's going on there. Your organization is helping to create something like 300,000 meals a day. Given where else you've worked, what's the most difficult thing about the work that you're doing in Ukraine right now?
So in Ukraine, for you to understand, I lost a little bit. It's been 65 days since the war began, right? So we landed 12 hours after the war began. We began in Poland, which was a natural place for us, safe. And we began taking care of the refugees. And we began feeding in Medica, right off a town called Shimich, which is a fascinating story because Shimich, and you've been there, it's a city of 60,000 people that has helped over 1.2 million Ukrainian refugees that left through that little town. And the beauty was that every single one in that town was doing whatever they could to provide relief in the early hours and days before anybody else was doing anything about it. It was people taking care of people. And that was actually very beautiful to see. Obviously, this was 12 hours after the war began. But the people that know Wall Central Kitchen, in the next 2, 3, 4 days, we were already expanding all across the Polish border. Before you knew, we were in the other countries surrounding Ukraine, Hungary and Moldova and Romania and Slovakia. Before we knew, we were not only in those countries, but we were also inside Ukraine. Why? Because the temperatures were freezing temperatures, minus 10, 20 Celsius degrees. People were coming through 24/7. Customs, the border was overwhelmed with so many people trying to leave that on the Ukrainian side, and on the receiving country side, everybody was overwhelmed. The wait could be not only hours, but days. Offshore, we had to be there providing quick relief to those people that needed a hot soup, baby food, a place to be away from the cold when those mothers had babies. Before we knew, day 6, day 7, we are already inside Ukraine, partnering with whom? With restaurants. Who better than restaurants that in the good times we feed the few, but in the bad times we have the power to feed the many. Before we knew, we were in many cities across Ukraine. Before we knew, we were in many shelters. Before we knew, in every transit hub, train stations, bus stations. Right now, today, we are more than 17 hot meals served. We are doing more than 300,000 hot meals and or sandwiches a day. We transport more than 8 million pounds of food. We have more than 440 restaurants, food trucks, and catering companies, plus the kitchen we have in Shimish, which is a kitchen that can do, if we wanted, up to 250,000 meals a day. We're in more than 110 Ukrainian towns. We are in more than 8 countries, including Germany and Spain. We have 910 shelters we feed every day. At the end of the day, we deliver food to more than 2,450 distribution sites every single day. That's what we do. That's what we've been doing for the last 64 days. Why we do it? Because I told you, when the wars of humanity seems to be happening, the best humans show up to take care of fellow citizens. That's what we've been doing, and for me, it's been an honor to be next to the Ukrainian people, because they are amazing people that are fighting for democracy and liberty, not only on their behalf, but on behalf of all of us.
It's an amazing operation, the work that you're doing. It's worth a round of applause as well. It's also not easy, and it's not entirely safe. We saw on the 17th of April, one of your kitchens was destroyed by a missile strike. Some of your staff were injured as well. And from social media, the sense was that you got straight back to work. But I want to know what it's like doing this work, knowing that it's dangerous work, that your staff, the people that you're working with, the volunteers, are in danger as this is unfolding.
I think for our organization, which is still a young organization, we've been in business as an organization 12, 13 years. We began after Haiti. We've been in difficult situations before. When we sit near a volcano, we decided to bring food to a little town full of elderly and children that cannot leave that town because it's too many elderly cannot move, because there are no roads, because there is no plan to evacuate them. Maybe because they don't want to be evacuated, some of them, because they say, I'm too old to move anywhere. But we feel we have to be next to them. That's risky. When we are sitting in the border in Colombia, where there are guerrillas, or inside Venezuela, where we are not necessarily seen as friends, that's risky. When we had to be delivering food through helicopter in 14 islands in Bahamas after Dorian decimated Abaco and Grand Bahama and all the little cays north of Abaco, that to a degree is dangerous when sometimes you are playing short on fuel sometimes, and the winds are still hitting hard because the remains of the hurricane, creates a lot of mayhem in the weather patterns. And obviously this is a war where a missile can hit any moment, where sometimes you forget that you are in a war zone because you want to be feeding the people, because we are next to the people that are risking their lives to feed people, especially the elderly, and people cannot move because they don't have a car, because they don't have a road, because they don't have a bridge to escape. And we are doing whatever it takes to try to bring that kind of gesture that a plate of food brings, which is, we care, we see you, we are not going to leave you alone, we're not going to let you go through this alone. So obviously we've been very safe in the process, but when you are delivering food north of Kyiv, within hours after the city is being liberated from the Russian troops, and it's mines, maybe soldiers, maybe somewhere that still remain behind for some reason. It's risk that we know. We didn't put anybody that didn't in Ukraine. Actually, the team of All Central Kitchen inside Ukraine was fairly small. But I tell you, we partner with locals. Who better than locals to take care of locals, right? I think we have more than 8,000 people in our network of residents and volunteers all across Ukraine. So yes, you are conscious of that, but we're not going to be ending the big problems that we face on this earth without taking some risks. In the next 25 years of my life, I want to be part of solving hunger problems around the world. The only way I can do this is with boots on the ground. Why? Because it's the only way I can learn. It's the only way I can be talking then to politicians, to big NGOs, to governments, to anybody that wants to be part of the solution. I cannot talk by theory. I can only be part of the solution when I gain the experience, when I listen to the people, when I see the problem firsthand, and then only then you can be bold enough to say, hey guys, we've been doing this for a long time, but still we have hunger. Still we have problems. The recipes of the past, they seem not to be working. We must do better, and we must write new recipes to provide relief to people or to end hunger in the world. This is why I go. This is why maybe you put yourself in more danger than you want, but I don't know any other way. There's no way these Ukrainians are going to be fighting this alone. There's many ways to fight against injustice. There's many ways. Our way, we call ourselves the food fighters, is being next to the people that need us in this dark hour on a war that shouldn't be happening, because one man decided to create mayhem not only on Ukraine, but indirectly around the world. We cannot let the bullies of the world, the very few men creating mayhem, to keep doing it without keeping them in check. How we keep them in check? In our way, with food. We bring love, we bring respect, one plate of food at a time. That's the only way I know how to do it. That's the only way World Central Kitchen knows how to do it.
Let me ask you about the personal cost of that. One of the most powerful scenes in the film is when you're in Puerto Rico and you essentially collapse because of exhaustion, because it's so much. What was going on in that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, I cry a lot. I usually have a big voice and I look like a big boy, yeah. But at the end, I'm like a little bird. I mean, I obviously I rather prefer they didn't show up that, but at the same time, I think it's very good that you show the emotions that you go through it, because you need to be emotional in a way. I cannot understand what people go through because I've not been going through that. I'm only next to the people that are going through that. But their emotions become your emotions, right? Sometimes, yes, you feel powerless. Maybe I'm talking about myself, but I know this is what everybody else, not only World Central Kitchen people, but many of us we face, right? That because we care to what happens to others, sometimes we make their grief and their problems our own. And I do believe it's the only way we can make that happen, when we try to put ourselves in the skin of others that are going through mayhem. Puerto Rico, in a way, yes, was heartbreaking, because I saw that the problem was not so complicated, but the problem was obvious. People needed food, elderly needed food. Many places with no electricity, all across an island. A piece of America in the heart of the Caribbean. My regret was like, man, how are we gonna solve the problem of hunger in the world? Well, we're gonna be taking care of 3 million Americans in the Caribbean. And this is why, for me, you saw me in a way breaking down. Even I try to break down with my very close people. But what keeps me going is that every morning you wake up very early on in the morning and you say to yourself, how many more people can we feed today? How many more cities can we arrive today? How many towns, villages we can arrive? Make contact and start telling the locals and the mayors, we're here next to you. We cannot solve every problem you have, but in the short term, food and water is not going to be one of your problems. I promise you that. And that's what I try to do every day. I'm a strong boy, but yes, I'm a guy that will put a tear or two here and there. And I rather prefer be that way, because it means that I know it's many more people like me around the world, in the audience here with us today, that they care. And sometimes the tear is a way to show that you really care. What I try to make sure is that the tear goes alongside real action. I always say that the big problems, they have very simple solutions. In our case, is just make sure that in the initial moments of an emergency, we are next to the people providing them relief with food and water.
You say something fascinating in the film about, and you've hinted at this idea of what happens when you leave. And you say, when the white man with power leaves, you want to be able to, in some ways, liberate the receiver of that food, that you want to ensure that the work is not just the savior sweeping in and helping people, but that you are creating a systemic change. Tell me more about that and why you feel that that is really at the heart of what you're doing as well. Not just feeding people, but changing those systems.
So remember that we are still a small organization. World Central Kitchen doesn't have more than 80 people that are part of the organization total. But let me show you Puerto Rico. And in Puerto Rico, I can tell you that we partnered with more than 150 farms, maybe more, over the last few years, which is the part of World Central Kitchen that people are not so aware. This is the resilience part. In a moment that many young people, you heard some of them in the documentary, are thinking about leaving because they think they want to protect themselves or their family members, and they decide to leave. What we give them is sometimes hope of saying, this region, this country, this island needs you. You are the one with boots on the ground, and you care, you have empathy. If you stay, with many of you, the response is going to be much better. And especially on the resilience, the moving away from the emergency and try to rebuild. That's why for us, those 100, 150, maybe 200 farms we've been helping is not solving every problem that maybe Puerto Rico was facing, but what do? We've been giving them grants, we've been giving them loans, we've been bringing experts from other parts of America to help the guys that had beehives, to help the people with greenhouses, to build them better so they can be ready for the next hurricane. The whole thing doesn't blow away with the wind, that now they have a system that they can put the greenhouse back into a container protected from the hurricane. In Bahamas, we're doing the same. We began helping the chicken producers, the egg producers, the fishermen, them buy very quickly when they don't have access to money because the banks are not giving them any loans because they are too small for anybody to take them seriously. We help them buying them new boats or buying them new fishing nets or technology, or helping them with ice and helping them build the ice facility. Fishermen make sure that the fish they catch is fresh so can get to the market and get the maximum value they can by selling to the local restaurants. This is one thing that I'm very proud that World Central Kitchen does. In Ukraine, we have right now, as I said, 440 restaurants plus. But in the process, we are helping the local economy, not only feeding the people in the bankers and people in need, but in the process, we are channeling every dollar through the economy. That doesn't solve every single problem, but shows the blueprint of how humanitarian aid in the process of covering the emergency can also be put to good use to help the local economies put that money to help them rebuild quicker and faster. That's the only way we know how to do it. I do believe for the years to come is the smartest way.
We see a lot, some of the extraordinary footage in this film of the work that you're doing around the world. But there are beautiful scenes as well of you cooking with your family in the kitchen, and it looks like madness, where everybody is involved and there's a lot going on all at the same time, and loud voices and food going in a lot of different directions. To you, I mean, where did that idea of food as a power for good come from? Because you see it in the work that you're doing, but you really see it in your house as well, in terms of just feeding people and using food as I said, a power for good.
Listen, I always say longer tables is what builds a better tomorrow, right? And this is not only a nice phrase that everybody will agree, but food is a very powerful way to create community. Why do you think we have so much attachment to food? Why we have so much attachment to set up the table, invite family or friends, and why those tables in the restaurant or at home become such an important part of who we are? Think for a second. What is the first moment we receive love in the form of a tangible that stays forever with us? The first tangible that we receive as a young, tiny child is when our mother brings us to her body and gives us love in the form of food. Or even our father, if our mother cannot, in the baby bottle. Food is given to us as love. that love that we receive from the hands of our loved ones, it stays with us forever. That's why food is such an amazing way we'll have to show others we love them, we care, and we welcome them into our world. Love will always be that way that will be shown through food. My father will always invite everybody. My mom will always be upset because we'll say, how many people did you invite? And my father will say, I don't know. Like, how do you don't know? And my always say, don't worry, if more people show up, we only add some more rice to the pan, and that's it. We feed everybody. For me, food was always that, it still is that. As soon as I finish with you, my daughter Inez, who just came from university, but she's here in DC, she's already setting up my paella pan. It's raining, so we're going to do it inside. And what I'm going to do during the next 30, 40 minutes, making a big paella rice. I have a couple of friends from Haiti that are visiting DC who are staying with us. And we'll do that paella pan. We'll bring it in the middle of the table, and we'll all eat probably from the same pan with wooden spoons. That's what food means to me. I know that's what food means. We can all show respect to others, making sure that we share those longer tables. We can all show respect to others, believing that high walls are not going to be solving the problems of the world. But the only way we're going to be taking care of the world is when we invite everybody to the table, where the bounty of the goodness of the earth must be enjoyed by all, must be shared by all. That's what food means to me, and I hope that's what food means to all of us.
Just finally, you do extraordinary work around the world in these disaster sites where the work is needed. How do we go about changing the systems to make sure that in places like this, we're sitting in Toronto right now, this is one of the richest cities in the world, and yet food bank use is extraordinary here. People are using it. It comes out of a pandemic, but it existed long before the pandemic as well. How do you go about changing those systems so that people have enough to eat here, in addition to in those areas where you have to go and do that urgent work?
I do believe that we need to start taking food more seriously. I think we take food for granted. I believe the governments of the world don't have a true food policy. The rich countries of the world have to have a better food policy. Food policy is not used the Department of Agriculture dealing with food as a commodity. Food, at the end of the day, is at the heart of what humans are. Food is national security. We need to have a person next to the presidents of the richest countries of the world recommending a smart food policy, first to take care of their citizens, but more important, to take care of the poorer countries around the world. And we're not going to do this throwing a bone to them. We're only going to do this if we stop throwing money at the problem and start investing into true solutions. The same thing we do in emergencies must be happening every day by the leaders of the world to solve the hunger issues we face today. People don't want our pity, people want our respect. How do we give respect? Making sure that everybody is able to feed their families with the dignity they all should be getting. That's in very big picture what we should be doing. Now we need a smart policy. We need people from both sides of the aisle. Food is not right or left. Food is not blue or red. Food is food. Will empower communities, will give people the possibility on their own to make it. This is the only way we will solve many of the challenges we face in the rich countries of the world, which also is hungry people, but in the process trying to help the poor countries of the world to make it on their own, giving them the dignity of a decent plate of world, empowering the communities in the process.
We'll let you get to your paella pan. Jose Andres, thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you for the story that you tell about what is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Love you guys. Next time I do it in person, I promise.
Jose Andres, chef and founder of World Central Kitchen. The documentary about him is called We Feed People. I spoke with him as part of the Hot Docs Film Festival on stage in front of a live audience. That was nice, in Toronto. That's The Current for this Tuesday. Coming up next on CBC Radio 1, it's Q. We mentioned this. One of the scenes you see in that film about Jose Andres is him with his family cooking in the kitchen. It is a wild scene. A lot of food. People raised voices. Everyone's in a good mood, excited about what they're doing. Food and Wine magazine years ago asked him what he listens to when he cooks at home. His answer was immediate: in his own kitchen. Jose Andres puts on Ennio Morricone's score to the 1986 Palme d'Or winning film The Mission. He insists everything tastes better if it's played while you cook. We'll leave you with a little bit of the master, Ennio Morricone. I'm Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening to The Current. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This is CBC Radio 1, 88.1 FM and 690 AM in Vancouver.
Do you want to share your music with the world? CBC Music's Toyota Searchlight Contest is here, looking for Canada's best undiscovered musical talent. It's your time to shine. Enter an original song for a chance to launch your music career. Get ready to take it to the next level. Bring it, sing it, play it, slay it. It all starts here. CBC Music's Toyota Searchlight 2022. Enter now at cbc.ca/searchlight.
The National Research Council official time signal. The beginning of the long dash indicates exactly 10 o'clock Pacific Daylight Saving Time.
This is CBC News from Vancouver. Good morning, I'm Drew Karakis. The Abbotsford Police Department says anyone who was displaced by a fire this morning in Abbotsford should check in at a reception centre at the Northview Church on Downs Road. The blaze started earlier this morning near the 30500 block of Cardinal Avenue. There's considerable damage to an apartment complex, and a number of people were forced to leave their homes. It's still not clear how that fire started or whether anyone has been hurt. The Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court has confirmed the authenticity of a leaked draft opinion, suggesting the court could soon overturn the landmark case that legalized abortion in the U.S. John Roberts says he has ordered an investigation into the leak, something he called an egregious breach of trust. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says if the conservative majority of justices does overturn Roe v. Wade, the Senate will vote on legislation to uphold women's access to abortions. Overseas, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has addressed members of the Ukrainian Parliament in Kyiv by way of video link. The CBC's Tom Perry reports.
I have one message for you today. Ukraine will win.
Addressing Ukraine's parliament, Boris Johnson echoed Britain's own wartime leader, Winston Churchill, as he described the Ukrainian people's fight.
This is Ukraine's finest hour that will be remembered and recounted for generations to come.
Britain has provided Ukraine with anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles. Johnson today pledged further support, including night vision equipment and radar to hunt down enemy artillery. A package of aid worth £300 million, or almost $500 million. Johnson's address follows his top-secret visit to Ukraine last month and comes as the UK moves to reopen its embassy in the Ukrainian capital. Tom Perry, CBC News, London.
The travel headaches at Vancouver International Airport have eased for now, but the airport authority says it's prepared if there's a repeat of the long lineups at security gates. In recent days, passengers faced lengthy delays at YVR, and some travelers even missed their flights. The airport authority has blamed a lack of staffing at the gates for the backlog. Mike McNaney is the Vice President and Chief External Affairs Officer at YVR.
The issue at hand is still staffing, but we will try and assist with the lineups in terms of moving people up in the line if their departing flight is coming up quite rapidly, directing passengers to different security points depending on what the throughput may be at a given point.
The Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, which is responsible for passenger screening, says domestic travelers should arrive at the airport 2 hours ahead of their flight times, 3 hours before international flights. Researchers say they are cautiously optimistic after seeing a video that appears to show a new calf swimming alongside members of the K-pod of the southern resident orcas. The CBC's Joel Ballard reports.
In the video, members of the K-pod are seen breaching the water just off the Oregon coast.
Most excitingly, we see swimming with K20, an adult female. We see what looks to be a very, very small little calf.
Michael Weiss with the Whale Research Center says K-pod hasn't produced a new calf since 2011. And while it's exciting, he stresses that researchers still need to confirm the finding.
We go out on the water, we take photos of both the left and right sides of the animal. So as we're doing that, we're monitoring behavior. We're taking pictures of the dorsal fin and saddle patch for ID. And in the case of a calf, we'll also be keeping track of which adult females they're associating with.
The critically endangered animals have struggled amid shrinking food supplies and low birth rates.
They've been kind of a shrinking pod over the last decade or so. So it'd be really, really good to get some signs that this pod is still capable of reproducing.
Mortality rates for young calves are high, but Weiss says he's crossing his fingers for a happy outcome. Joel Ballard, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that's the CBC News from Vancouver. We'll have more news on CBC Radio 1 in half an hour. And for news anytime, go to our website, cbc.ca/BC. And taking a look at the weather now for Metro Vancouver and the South Coast. Mainly cloudy today. There's also a chance we could see some drizzle, possibly showers this afternoon. Today's high near 14. Periods of rain tonight with the overnight to 8 degrees. And then tomorrow there's a chance of showers in the morning. Otherwise, a mainly cloudy day tomorrow and the high near 12. And then for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we're expecting periods of rain. Right now in Whistler, it's 8 degrees and cloudy, 11 and overcast in Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Sally Field.
Hi, I'm Salman Rushdie. Hi, I'm Elvis Costello, and you're listening to Q. And you're listening to Q.
You're listening to Q with Tom Power.
Don Was is a music producer, and he's not just a music producer, he's one of those music producers that a lot of different artists are dying to work with. Brian Wilson, Bonnie Raitt, the Rolling Stones, Willie Nelson, they've all wanted Don in their recording studio, and they've all wanted Don at a particular point in their career when they need to come back. So Don Was is going to tell you what he's learned along the way of producing some of the greatest records of all time, including the time he says he failed Bob Dylan, a special reminiscence of Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. And he'll tell you why he took over as president of one of music's most storied record labels. That's coming up on Q. All right, welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started with this.
Like this, 40 million years ago, I lit a cigarette, picked up a monkey's shelter dog. A string was spitting fire, the sky was blue as ice. I felt a little tight, so I watched my enemy fight. I was a dinosaur. I was a dinosaur.
From 1987, that is Was Not Was with Walk the Dinosaur, which was a massive hit in the 80s and then became a massive hit again in the 90s when it came out for the Flintstones movie. And Don Was co-produced that song. I mean, he's one of the Wazes of Was Not Was. He co-wrote, he co-produced it, he co-founded the band. But I'm sorry to tell you, we're not going to spend the whole show today talking about Walk the Dinosaur as much as I'd like to, because since then, Don Was has gone on to become one of the most important music producers in modern music history. I mean, where to start? He's worked with so many greats like Bonnie Raitt, Bob Dylan, the B-52s, Brian Wilson, the Rolling Stones, Garth Brooks, Willie Nelson, Canada's own Bare Naked Ladies, and for over a decade, he's been the president of Blue Note Records, which is a jazz label, kind of the jazz label, recorded everyone from Miles Davis to Thelonious Monk and Norah Jones. So there's lots to talk to Don about. So this is my favorite kind of guest in some ways, because every single thing you ask him, he has a couple of stories for. So you're going to hear some great stories about working with some of the greatest musicians of all time, growing up in Detroit, and some secrets of music production. But we wanted to start with Blue Note. Here's my conversation with Don Was. How are you?
Hey, Tom, how are you, man? Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Where are you?
In Santa Monica, California today.
And how's Santa Monica?
Warm and nice. I don't mean to torment anybody up north, but it's like summer here.
I'm gonna cut that out of the Canadian broadcast, so I don't have riots. So, congrats on 10 years as head of Blue Note. What was going through your mind when you took that job?
Well, it was conflicting. I wasn't looking for a job. I was in New York. I was producing John Mayer's album, Born and Raised. We had one night off. I went up to a club way up near Harlem called Smoke, and I saw a singer that I'd heard on the radio before, a guy named Gregory Porter.
So long I've been needing your love. Hear me.
And I just thought it was one of the best shows I'd been to. I sat there for 3 sets, eating ribs, drinking coffee, and I just wasn't for business. It was just made me feel good all night. Next morning, I was having breakfast with a buddy of mine, a guy named Dan McCarroll, who at that time was president of Capitol Records. And we weren't even talking about music. But at the end of the meal, I said, you know, if Blue Note Records is still a part of Capitol Records, you should sign this guy I saw last night. Now, unbeknownst to me, Bruce Lundahl, who'd run the company for 30 years and was one of the most beloved record executives ever, did a brilliant job. He was ill and he couldn't keep running the company, and they were looking for someone who could keep the ethos alive, and he offered me the job, like right there. He said, no, you should sign Gregory Porter. And I was tormented because my whole life had been designed to avoid work. I just didn't want to lift heavy boxes. I think that's true of a lot of musicians and maybe a lot of politicians. And I was 58. I thought, all right, I did it. And I didn't have to do that. I was able to support myself, playing music and making records, I felt like I got away with murder doing that. But it was Blue Note Records, and I've been a fan since I was 16. I bought my first Blue Note record in, actually earlier, about in 1966. I was 14. And I couldn't resist it. So I was conflicted. I always kind of thought of the record company as like your enemy. It doesn't have to be.
I want to play you something. You mentioned 66. Just take a listen to this. So speaking of Blue Note, actually, you know what? I'm not going to say what it is. Do you want to say what it is?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, S Mode for Joe, which is the first Blue Note track I ever heard. It's the first jazz I really heard. I'm sure I heard it in the background earlier in life, but it's the first thing I was ever listening to. I was 14. I was driving around Detroit with my mom running errands, and I wanted to be hanging out with my friends. It was on a weekend. And so I was such a pain in the neck now that she just left me in the car with the keys to play with the radio. And I landed on that song. Now, do you actually have the record there? Can you play the 20 seconds before where you started?
Do you have the cut? Do we have the cut 20 seconds before we started? You tell me why we had to go back there.
All right, so those anguished cries you heard coming from that sax, that little break, that was matching my mood as a 14-year-old, being stuck driving around and running errands with my mom when I wanted to be at Northland Mall, hanging out with my friends, right? And so when I was turning the dial, I landed right on that section as that section came up. I was like, what is this? But I knew it matched how I was feeling. But I noticed that 20 seconds into it, the drummer, Joe Chambers, who, by the way, is still an artist on Blue Note Records, Joe Chambers kicks in and he starts swinging on the ride cymbal, and Joe Henderson falls into line. And I thought, he was saying to me, Don, you got to groove in the face of adversity. And I thought, all right, I get that, man. I'm gonna relax here. And sure enough, when my mom came back to the car, I was a nice kid again. And this music had changed my mood 180 degrees in about 30 seconds, and there weren't even lyrics or anything.
But wasn't it exciting as a music fan in Detroit in the 60s? Like, wasn't there...
Oh,
wasn't there Motown and early...
Joe Henderson was actually a Detroit musician, even though he was on Blue Note Records. A lot of the Blue Note roster came from Detroit. But also, I'd go out to clubs, see the MC5, the Stooges, and the Amboy Dukes with Ted Nugent. That was like the house band. It's at this little teenage club right behind my house. I could hear him play every Friday night. Motown was there. It was great. A great soul R&B scene.
Oh yes, wait a minute, it's a boatman. Hey,
Great blues scene. John Lee Hooker was a local guy.
boom, 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 boom. Gonna shoot you right down.
Johnny Hooker was a local guy?
Yeah, he started working in the auto plants in 1948.
And Bob Seger, I talked to Alice Cooper recently, and he let me know, and I didn't know this, but I didn't know he had like a garage rock band in the 60s in Detroit too. Like, he was a rocker.
They were badass. I saw him play Bob Seger in the Last Herd, I think that's what it was called. And they're great. I saw him play with Teagarden and Van Winkle at the John Sinclair Freedom Rally in 1970 with John Lennon on the film. So Bob's like, he's the Bob Dylan of Detroit,
Yeah.
He's the poet of the ethos of the city, I think,
I want to play another song. Take a listen to it.
When the sun comes down, they hit the street. In the bars, they try to meet some other sculptor. He's a baby of living alone till the dragon is so weak. Squeaks, and out come freaks. The wood squeaks, and out come freaks.
So from 1981, that's Was Not Was with Out Come the Freaks from the self-titled first album. Don Moss is my guest, who formed the band with his childhood friend David Weiss, who became David Was. So hold on, so explain this to me. So
yeah.
I know that Was Not Was came out of what you were hearing in Detroit.
Uh-huh.
So I guess Motown, MC5, kind of the blues. I guess funk.
Jazz.
Funk was happening, jazz was happening. How did all this come together to make that?
Well, I wasn't like a teenager then. I was probably, I was like 28 when we made that record. And so I'd been playing on records and playing around with some musicians. So I knew a lot. Like Larry Fratangelo, who did all the percussion on One Nation Under a Groove and played live with Funkadelic. He's on that record playing percussion. Marcus Belgrave, a jazz trumpeter who was the most important jazz musician on the scene actually in Detroit, played with Charles Mingus and Ray Charles. He's playing trumpet on it. Wayne Kramer from the MC5 is playing guitar on that. And so it was just kind of an amalgamation of the jambalaya of what we, the milieu that we grew up in the middle of. That's all we were really trying to convey, I think. In subsequent years, I ended up working with some of the best songwriters ever. Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson, Keith Richards, Chris Christopherson, and. I guess it's probably Brian Wilson put me over the edge. Working with him, every time I sat down at the piano, I thought, well, what's the point of me writing a song when these guys are all out there? And the way I finally overcame it was to realize that great as they are, I'll never be as good as them. But on the other hand, they didn't grow up in Detroit in the 1950s and 60s when the auto factories were booming and all these cultures were coming in with the workers and everything was colliding and there was real excitement and all these hybrid forms of music were happening. So I thought, just be who you are. It was an incredible time to grow up in an incredible place. Detroit was just alive culturally.
I just want to play a little bit of Walk the Dinosaur. Just take a listen to this.
Okay.
I walk the dinosaur. I walk the dinosaur. Everybody walk the dinosaur. Open the door. Everybody walk the dinosaur. Open the door.
So, Don, I'll be honest with you. I didn't know until, like, I know your work pretty well. From, I know your records very well. Incidentally, like, the records you've made have meant something to me, right? You know, like, and I knew that song because that got another sort of life in the early 90s when the Flintstones movie came out and they had it in that. Yeah. I didn't know that was you until I got ready for this interview.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
I was going to ask because it feels like I'm always nervous to play those kind of songs, even just big hits for people. What's your relationship with that song now?
Well, it's ever changing. What I hear now, Sweet Pea Atkinson, who was the lead singer on that and was one of my closest friends for 40 years, he passed away early on from COVID, I think. And I just, when I hear it now, that's all I can think is I'm glad that he lives on in these recordings, but I miss him a lot. And so that is now replaced what was a really bad memory, which was that in 1989, that became a hit first in England and went on a TV show, and all of a sudden it jumped up in the charts. And we had the opportunity to be on Top of the Pops, which would have made it a top 10 hit. But because of some kind of labor laws, we had to leave the country for 10 days and then come back to get new work permits so we could be on Top of the Pops. And they sent us out on a tour, but we weren't really on tour. We were lip syncing the records. They're sending us to like clubs to lip sync the record on the dance floor. And all we did was stop the flow in the club. So we met hostile reactions everywhere. And we're standing there moving around without our instruments plugged in. And it was so humiliating.
Right, because you guys, coming from Detroit, you guys know how to make a club move. Like, you can do it.
Yeah, we can do it, but we didn't have, they weren't putting us on tour at that point. It was just kill 10 days and make enough bread to, like, cover your hotels. And it was just awful, and I can't get past it. That ruined that song.
I want to. So, like, obviously, I want to ask you a couple of questions about Bob Dylan and Brian Wilson and the Stones and all that. But given that this is a Canadian show, I reached out to a good buddy of our show, Ed Robertson from Bare Naked Ladies.
Oh, there we go.
Because Maroon, the record you made with B&L, was a really, really big record, especially here in Canada. I want to play. So I asked Ed if he would give you something and ask you about something. Take a listen to this.
When I think about making Maroon with Don Was, I think about how present he was, sitting in the center of the band through every pre-production rehearsal and every performance on the record, in the studio, like not in the control room, in the live room, sitting in the middle of the band, completely immersed in every performance.
That's Ed Robertson from the Bare Naked Ladies. Yeah. Well, hey, let me ask you first, how does it feel hearing that?
That's beautiful. He could have said a lot of things. I'm glad that's what sticks out.
That's not a production technique you hear a lot, and I think even like listeners who would listen to this who would think about what a producer does would think about them sitting on a couch or sitting at the control board, directing, giving some notes. I work with producers who all they do is go, or no, the ideas, that's kind of it. Talk to me about immersion there before we start talking about your production.
Well, just as someone who played on records, when everyone's in the same room, there's air moving, and you feel that physically. And that's part of hearing what's going on naturally. So it's really important to hear what the other musicians are hearing and feel what they're feeling and actually get the physicality of sound waves hitting you in the chest and what the energy is like when the band's playing. Because then you go back in the room to listen to the playback, and if you're not feeling the same thing that you know is there, then you know you got to fix something. You know, there have been times when I work with engineers and I see them messing with the EQ on the drums automatically, and they're trying to change things. I said, well, have you gone out there and listened to it? Listen to what the instrument sounds like first, and then try to capture that, and then see, maybe you don't have to do all this. You don't have to reinvent the sound. Maybe there's a great sound out there. So it's really important to sit at the source. Also, there's just some practical matters. You know, there's a glass between you and the band, so if you talk, you have to reach over and touch a button and hold it down, and then you can't hear them. It's much easier to communicate if you're sitting in a room with everybody.
When did you figure this out? When did you figure out that you might be able to be a good producer?
I knew really early on. I think it's probably like when Sgt. Pepper came out. And that was the first record I can think of, which was whatever, 1967.
You said I could do that.
Well, no, I became aware that the studio techniques were being used as musical elements.
Yeah.
It wasn't just documentary where it's just to capture what's happening. Now the studio and the microphones and the outboard gear, they're creating textures that have an emotional and a musical impact. And I became fascinated by that aspect of it. How does the technology in the room become another musical instrument?
I want to play a song right now.
Are you ready for the thing called love? Don't come to me and you it does come up above. I ain't no porcupine, take off your big glove. Are you ready for the thing called love?
Bonnie Raitt from '89 with Thing Called Love from her album Nick of Time. Don Was, producer of that record. Don Was, president of Blue Note Records. Don Was, my guest right now as we nerd out a little bit about music. I got to talk to Bonnie about this record, and I wanted to ask you about it.
Mm-hmm.
She told me she wasn't in a good place personally or professionally when she came in to do that record. What do you remember about going into those sessions with Bonnie?
Well, she was probably in better shape than she was 2 years before.
Right.
I felt very fortunate to meet Bonnie at that moment in time. I'd been a fan since her first record. We're pretty close in age, so I was in college, and when her first album came out, and I was just blown away by her. So she was always a favorite of mine. But when we did Nick of Time, she had been sober for like a year and a half. And I think one of the things that happens when you get sober is that whatever emotions you were trying to drown out with drink and drugs, you have to find another way to release that. And in her case, it made her a much better artist and made her able to write a song like Nick of Time. So I thought she was in great shape. She was incredibly clear, and she sounded, she sounded better than ever. And she'd written some deeply personal songs, and that, I think, that's where therein lies the mojo of Nick of Time. So she was a woman who was about to turn 40 and decided to write about turning 40 instead of, and not just about turning 40, but of being mature and not accepting mistreatment in relationships, being strong, standing up for herself, but also being vulnerable about what women that age go through, which had been anathema in rock and roll.
Yeah, there were no records for people over 40 in the late 80s that didn't exist.
No, if you were 40, you tried to pretend you were 18.
Yeah.
And the record companies saw to it that you did. So it was brave for them to put that out. And Bonnie was just trying to be real and get these feelings out of her and out into the universe so they wouldn't be trapped inside, And I think unbeknownst to anybody was the fact that the audience had matured with her, and they were really happy to have someone singing about what it means to be 40 years old, as opposed to just singing about cars or these things. And it just resonated way beyond our expectations.
Can we play something to talk about?
Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. Let's give them something to talk about. How about love?
So this is a bit indulgent for me because that's a bit of a recent rediscovery for me. That's one of those songs that I heard on the radio a lot when I was a kid. And then it came on in my speaker in the kitchen the other day, and I felt that you can't help but dance a little bit. Like I was just doing the dishes and I was moving and dancing. The reason I wanted to play it for it is also not just what you had to do with it, written by a Canadian.
Yeah.
Shirley Eichhardt.
Shirley Eichhardt, yeah. No, it's a great song. I don't know that Bonnie knew her personally, but she'd sent a cassette, and it was like at the bottom of a box. But Bonnie is a pretty thorough, she does thorough research. She listens to everything. Also, she's a very profoundly deep musicologist with a lot of knowledge. So she listens to all kinds of stuff. And that just came up. She probably listened to 300 cassette demos that weren't happening, but that one was just like, wow.
Did you know that one would take off?
I knew it was really good. Shirley's demo was great, and you could imagine Bonnie singing it. Between that and I Can't Make You Love Me, which is also on that album, unbelievable. I think we knew going in that we were okay, because it's hard to follow. Nick of Time won the Grammy for Album of the Year and sold like 8 million records or something like that. And that could put a lot of pressure on you to have to follow that up. But when we had Shirley's song and I Can't Make You Love Me, I think we knew that it was going to be okay.
People are talking
I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, written by a Canadian, Shirley Eichhardt from New Brunswick. Produced by Don Was, Bonnie Raitt, and Something to Talk About. More Don Was in just a minute. He's going to tell some great stories about working with folks like Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, and Willie Nelson. And if those artists aren't your favorite, he's also going to tell you what he thinks makes great music and where he thinks genius comes from in any of us. It's coming up after this on Q.
Maybe they're seeing something we don't, darling. Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. Let's give them something to talk about. Something to talk about. Let's give them
Good morning, it's 10:30. I'm Drew Karakis. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. A number of people have been forced out of their homes in Abbotsford after a fire in an apartment complex this morning. It's near the 30500 block of Cardinal Avenue near Mount Lehman Road. There's considerable damage to the structure. Still not clear what might have sparked that fire. The Abbotsford Police Department says displaced residents should check in at a reception centre at the Northview Church on Downs Road. New Westminster and Victoria are expected to get mobile crisis teams similar to one operating on the North Shore. The Peer Assisted Care Team is an alternative to having police respond to calls involving someone suffering from a mental health issue. Instead of armed officers, the team sends mental health experts to offer support, resources, and counselling. The BC government says the new teams are expected to be operational later this year. Whale researchers say they are excited about a new video that appears to show a calf swimming with members of K-Pod, of the endangered southern resident killer whales. The video was shot recently off the Oregon coast. Michael Weiss with the Whale Research Center says K-Pod hasn't produced a new calf in more than a decade. He says it's exciting, but he stresses that researchers still need to confirm that a birth has actually occurred. In the weather, mainly cloudy with a chance of showers or drizzle today, and then periods of rain tonight. There's a chance of showers again tomorrow.
You're listening to Q across Canada on CBC Radio 1 and across North America on Sirius XM 169 and from PRX. I'm Tom Power. So in just a moment ago, you heard some of my conversation with the music producer Don Was. He has produced an insane number of musicians that you're probably somewhat familiar with. Bob Dylan, Brian Wilson, Bonnie Raitt, Garth Brooks, Chris Christopherson, the B-52s, the Rolling Stones. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And the thing is that Don didn't produce any of those artists at the beginning of their careers. Don worked with these people when he was already a fan of their work, a fan of their earlier work. And Don has some pretty interesting things to say about that part of the relationship. Here's my question for you. So you work with people like Elton John and Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones and Brian Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
So at the same time, there's one thing I know about you is what a fan of music you are and how you grew up loving these people. How do you produce their music honestly without having a preconceived notion of what they should sound like based on your affection for their previous work?
Yeah, well, that's a very that's a very good point.
I don't know.
No, it's a really good point, and it shows that you have a profound understanding of the process, because that's a real thing at the core. Because I think you got to be a fan, and you got to believe in the artist, and you have to trust. That's if you're producing a 19-year-old or the biggest band in the world. It's tough. Like, I think I failed Bob Dylan, to be honest with you, on Under the Red Sky.
There was a little boy, and there was a little girl.
Because in the back of my mind was a preset notion of what Bob Dylan was supposed to sound like, based on what he'd done in the past, exactly as you expressed it. And I was trying to steer him into that. And he had no desire to go there. And I wasn't listening to him. There was a moment, the very first session, the assistant engineer ran a DAT tape of everything. So every word that was uttered in the studio, we had recorded, which I said, give me that. We can't have that floating around. But I did listen to part of it while I was driving back home from the first session. And in it, Bob was explaining something that he wanted to try. And I was telling him why it wouldn't work. And I had to pull over. Man, I wanted to throw up. I thought, man, this is your hero. You waited your whole life to be in the studio with him. And now you're not even willing to trust his instincts enough to try this thing he's suggesting. And in retrospect, I realized he was trying to go to something new, but I was fighting him, and I vowed never to do that again.
So what do? You just try to go zen with them and just try to accept whatever they want to do and try to...
I'm willing to chase up a terrible idea for 3 days on the chance that they know better than me, which is always the case. You got to do that. You shouldn't produce the record. So I'll go down a manhole with someone, and I'm usually surprised. Usually something happens. If it's not exactly what they talked about, we land on something else, which leads us to something else, and that's part of the fun of it. So I learned to be a lot more open-minded and trusting, and not to just recreate stuff that happened already. What was the point of pushing Bob Dylan into a position where he's recreating Blonde on Blonde? That's like the dumbest thing, just because that's a stupid fanboy thing that's got nothing to do with actual creation. And that's recreation. It's like cartoon world or something like that. So I put a lot of value in creating something that no one's ever heard before.
Yeah.
That's a really noble thing to pursue. It kind of goes against the conventional wisdom of pop music marketing. But if you really think about it and look back on everything that was innovative, whether it's Charlie Parker or the Beatles or Prince, whatever, they all absorbed the foundational roots of what preceded them and mastered them, and then took that knowledge to create something brand new. And that's the music that lasts. That's the stuff that you listen to 40 years later.
Yeah, the David Letterman says, you can't subvert what you don't understand.
That's really good. I never heard that before, but that's really good.
I'll take 10%, Don. Don't worry.
I'm writing that down. That's very good. You don't understand. I love that.
Isn't that great? Yeah. I'm a bluegrass guy. I grew up playing bluegrass music, so I'm a really big Bill Monroe fan. For people who don't know, Bill Monroe's the father of bluegrass music, also just a really weird guy. And someone said to me the other day that everything Bill Monroe does is a Bill Monroe story. If Bill Monroe goes and if someone saw Bill Monroe get coffee, that's a Bill Monroe story. I think it's the same thing with Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
So tell me about working with Bob.
Well, I'll tell you, I haven't got anything bad to say. He's always been really nice to me.
Yeah.
And I've learned a whole lot from him, not just about making records and music, but about life. You know, I mean, there's a song on Under the Red Sky called "Born in Time." And when we were doing it, I didn't quite get what it was about. And I knew better than to say, "What's this about, Bob?" But I thought, it's like "Born in Time" for what? You know, and then about 10 years later, I don't know where I was, but I got this notion. I understood the idea of a universe where there was no time, where time is not relevant. It's just relevant on Earth. And then I realized, born the world of time. So I called him up, like really early in the morning the next day. I said, "I got it, man, Born in Time." And we talked for a couple of hours, and he turned me on to a bunch of books that really changed my whole way of looking at life. So he's been great like that. He's well-read. He's super smart. He's everything you want Bob Dylan to be. And he's also funny. You know, he's like we had the sessions have always been fun with him.
I've heard that from everybody, that he's really funny. Yeah. He's a funny guy.
Yeah. So I enjoy him.
Still let me read it with feeling.
Can we play some Stones? We did a song we get to them.
I'm just your cruising, can't help myself. I love you, baby. I know I live. Oh, crazy, you are my baby. I'm just your cruising.
From your most recent Rolling Stones album, Blue and Lonesome, that's the Rolling Stones with Just Your Fool. Don Was is my guest. What do I want to ask you here? I kind of want to ask you what it's like to record with the Stones, but I also know we just lost Charlie Watts.
No. He was such a remarkable character, man, because he didn't play hard. He played like a jazz drummer. And he had his arms down his side. He didn't waste a whole lot of unnecessary physical motion. He put it into the thing. It sounds like he's playing so hard. You listen to him, you think he's like a muscle man, like Kenny Aronoff with the tank tops and and he's ripped. And he's just this refined guy. But for some reason, there were a couple of things about his playing that no one could figure out. He was a really enigmatic musician. He had this ritual before each song we record where he'd hit the drum with the tuning peg, right, to tune the snare drum, say. And he'd touch the pegs, but he'd never turn them. What? It's like some weird little ritual, you know. It's like doing a cross or making the peace sign. He'd hit all the pegs, but not turn them. But no matter what key the song was in, the drum was always in tune.
Whoa.
There were little things like that that were so mystifying. The first session we did was for an album called Voodoo Lounge, and on the very first day, he started playing. We were getting the drum sound. I said, "Man, maybe we should change the head on the snare drum." And the room got like super quiet. And this was 1993, and he hadn't changed the head on his snare drum since 1978. It was the same head that he used on Some Girls, and it was on every tour that they'd done, every record and every tour that they'd done since Some Girls, and he hadn't changed the head. So it was really like asking him to give me, his appendix. He was shocked, and no one ever had the nerve to ask him, and I was just too ignorant to know not to ask. And he changed the head.
He did.
Yeah, he did. Sounded great. So then he totally got into changing heads and doing different things, but he was kind of superstitious about not changing anything.
I like, for people who don't know anything about the drums who are listening to that, like even if they don't understand what changing a head of a snare is, it tells you a little bit about Charlie. It tells you a little bit about the kind of guy he was, you know?
Yeah. You know, a lot of people think he's a raw kind of drummer, but in '96, we're doing an album called Bridges to Babylon. Mick was always looking to make it more contemporary, right? So we thought, let's make some loops out of Charlie's drums and apply some hip hop techniques to them. Just try it, right? So we put on the Chronic, Dr. Dre.
1, 2, 3, and to the folks, Snoop Doggy Dogg.
Just pumped it through his headphones. We said, just play to this album. And he played along with the Chronic, and he never flammed once. It was perfect. He had metronomic time, and he was locked in the entire time. And I didn't realize he had the chops to do that. Very few people can do that.
But back to the lecture at hand. Perfection is perfected, so I'ma let them understand. From a young
the flamming, for people who don't know, is if there's a snare drum on the Dr. Dre record and you hit a little bit behind. Flam is like hitting not at the same time.
It's kind of onomatopoeic. It sounds like flam, you know?
Yeah. He never flunked once. You know, he was completely locked. He had the chops to do anything, but preferred to play in a looser fashion. And he knew exactly how far you could push it before it would fall apart. That's one of the things that makes the Stones such a great band, is that everyone feels the beat in a slightly different place in that band. But they're not so far apart that it falls apart, but they push it to the limit. Charlie embraced it all and held it together. It's a subtle thing, but he's such an important component of that band and such a great musician.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Don, I want to go back to Blue Note in a second, but before I do, I've been wanting to ask you this question the whole time.
Okay.
So when you work with, like, again, Brian Wilson, Bob Dylan, Bonnie Raitt, Paul Westerberg, Garth Brooks, I mean, I could go on and on and on, like Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson. Having worked with so many genius level musicians as you have, do they all have anything in common?
Yeah, they have so much in common. Yeah. I mean, I used to feel that, I still feel this way kind of, but the image I always had was that there's this great creative ether floating way up in the sky, right? And when the ideas are there, you sort of reach in, and whatever lands in your hand, you pull down. But all the good ideas are like floating at the top of this ether, and very few people have tentacles long enough to reach all the way to the top and get the good stuff.
Yeah.
And all the people you mentioned have the long tentacles. They all understand that it's something that's moving through them. It's not their idea. They don't really have ownership. One time I asked Bob Dylan, I said, how come you can write Gates of Eden and I can't? And he said, well, if it makes you feel any better, I didn't really write it. He said, I remember moving the pencil over the paper, but I don't know where it came from. It came through me. And to a man, everyone that you mentioned there will say the same thing. Keith Richards never says, I got a great idea, hold it. Hello, so hold it, incoming. so they are vessels.
So is that nature? Is that nature? Is that something divine? Is that God? What is it?
I wish I knew, man. If I knew, I'd maybe get more for myself. I don't even know where to go shopping for.
I don't even know where to go shopping. But yeah, I guess it has to be there.
That's the mystery of the whole thing. That's what makes it beautiful. Like every time I go into a studio, I don't care if it's for a 19-year-old kid making the first record or the Stones who've been doing it for 60 years. I'm nervous. I get butterflies in my stomach because I know something cool will happen, but you never know where it's going to come from. It's a little like surfing. You know, you can learn how to get up on the board, and how to stay up. But you don't control the waves at all. You got zero control over the ocean. So you just wait to catch that wave, and you never know where it's going to come from.
Well, that's what I mean. This is you as a label president now. I got to talk to Jack Antonoff. You know Jack?
Sure.
Yeah, incredible, and kind of the Don Was of. I mean, you are the Don Was of right now. But he is putting out a lot of good records right now, which are good records too, right? Taylor Swift, Lord,
fantastic.
His own band, Bleachers, and I said that to him. I said we had sort of a similar conversation, and he said, that's why I don't blame label people for trying to make it happen again. That's why I don't blame them from taking all the best songwriters and performers and putting it in the room, or taking giving people songs, go write something like this, because of course they're financially invested. They're going to try and control something that really rarely happens.
Yeah. It's kind of pointless. I try to tell everyone, just do anything except what you did yesterday. but yeah, I like the idea of an album like Bitches Brew. When I first heard that album, it's Miles Davis album from like 1970 or something. And when I first heard it, I didn't know what they were doing. I dug it, but I didn't know what was happening to create that. And the beauty of it is that no one did, including those musicians. That style of music didn't exist until they laid it down. The day before, that music was never heard, never existed. And that's a great thing to strive for. Do something that nobody's ever done before. That doesn't mean it should be bad art. Good art is communicative art. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be generous. Generous music is where you feel something deep inside and you bleed to get it out and to give it to someone else in the hopes that they're going to receive that, and it'll help them make sense out of their lives, or at least entertain them for 3 minutes at the minimal, but maybe you can actually help people make sense out of a life that makes absolutely no sense. So you got to do all that, but do it in a way that no one's ever done it before. That's music to a true artist's ears.
Well, on that, let's play one more clip before we go. That's When It Was Now from Terence Blanchard's 2021 Blue Note album, Absence. I got to talk to Terence a couple of weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago now, about the opera, A Fire Shut Up in My Bones. And the thing we talked about was largely about like the stories opera hasn't been telling and these stories that opera got to tell. And it made me think about you as Blue Note president, because you're not just custodian of a legacy, you are also helping steer a ship for the future of that storied record label.
Yeah.
What stories do you want Blue Note to tell?
The truth, man, just like this. I just want people to tell the truth. But, when I first got the gig, I would tell you I was woefully unprepared to be the president of a record company. But one of the things I knew I had to do at the very beginning was really figure out why the music of this label, which has now been around 83 years, why if you put on an album that's 60 years old, it still sounds relevant? Why the catalog still sells, why people are still interested in this stuff, and what were they doing in every era? And I found a manifesto that the founders of the label wrote in 1939, and they really dedicated themselves to the pursuit of authentic music and to providing unlimited, uncensored expression for the artists. All right, well, that's good, man. Because how do you reconcile a label that's got Norah Jones, Van Morrison, Wayne Shorter, and Robert Glasper on it? What's the common link there? The common link is that any one of them can step up to the microphone and tell you the truth about their inner emotional lives. And it doesn't matter what modes or scales you use. That's really at the core of that music. So inherent in that mission is the notion that you can't tell people I don't know what the story is. I tell you a story, man, but just tell it well and tell the truth and dig deep. And those are the artists we're interested in. There's some, when I worked with Garth Brooks, this is really when I realized this.
Was this the Chris Gaines record, or was this the...
It was indeed the Chris Gaines record.
Yeah.
The first session I did with him, he stepped up to the microphone and he started singing.
There's no more waiting, holding out for love.
And imagine like the line where the speakers are as being like the 50-yard line at a football game. So that's the speaker line. Most people never cross that line. The big stars jump out a little bit. Garth jumped out so far that it sounded like he was almost behind me. I was like, oh, now I know why he's the biggest recording artist in the world, which he was in 2000. And that's just some crazy gift.
I played out the field, I suppose.
Mick Jagger's got that. Aretha Franklin's got that. I got to record with her one time, and of course it's a great way to measure artists. John Coltrane's got that. Miles Davis has got that. That their voices transcend. It's being audiogenic. It's like a fashion model. Claudia Schiffer is photogenic, yeah, because she jumps off the page and gets your attention, and then you look at the page and you find out that she's wearing those jeans and you want to buy those jeans. So audiogenic is leaping out of the speaker, and that's something they can't teach in school. It's a gift that you either got or you don't.
Let me close off like this, and I could talk to you for 8 more hours. This is exciting. We always end the interviews with a song that we get the artist to pick out. And typically I say, I typically go to artists and I'll say from your album, your new album, this is the single, that's the single. What's a song on the album you wish had a little bit more love? Mm-hmm. So let's go to the Don Was production and artist discography. Can you go through for a needle in that haystack and pick a song for us to play?
I'll tell you what, it was just one of my favorites. It was one of my favorite sessions of all time. The Willie Nelson singing Across the Borderline. I was kind of auditioning to make a Willie record, and they flew me over. The Highwaymen were appearing in Dublin at the Point Big Amphitheater there. And so I went over, and we took them into the studio, Windmill Lane, to cut the song that we had to do for a movie, and that was my audition. And we cut it in one take, and we're all set up. And Willie said, all right, you got another song. So I played him Ry Cooder's version of Across the Borderline with Harry Dean Stanton singing that last verse.
But hope remains when pride is gone, and it keeps you moving on, calling you across the borderline.
And we talked about the meaning of the song. He said, all right, let's go do it. And we worked it up. And it's one take. And as we got to the second chorus, I was thinking, please, nobody messed this up. It was just extraordinary. It was just floating. It was just perfect. And I just knew we had a big fish on the line. So we go into the control room, and he says to the engineer, who's just a kid who was the staff engineer at Windmill Lane in Dublin, he said, I just rolled this joint here. And he takes out a Sharpie, and he puts a little blue dot 3/4 of the way down. He said, I'm going to start smoking this. When it gets to the blue dot, your mix is done. And you have the records that you're proud of. You have the ones that were hits. But what are the ones that you want to play for yourself to make yourself feel good? And that's right up there at the top of my list.
Don, lovely to talk to you, man. Thank you so much for making the time.
Great to speak with you, Tom. Thank you, man.
There's a place where I've been told every street is paved with gold, and it's just across
across the borderline. When it's time to take your turn, here's a lesson that you must learn. You could lose more than you'll ever find. When you reach the broken promised land, when every dream slips through your hands, you'll know it's too late to change your mind. 'Cause you paid the price to come so far, just to wind up where you are. And you're still just across the borderline. Up and down the Rio Grande, 1,000 footprints in the sand reveal the secret one can define. The river flows on like a breath in between our life and death. Who's the next to cross the borderline?
From 1993, that is Willie Nelson and Across the Borderline, a track produced by my guest Don Was. Before that, you heard my conversation with Don, who has produced pretty much everyone under the sun: Bob Dylan, Bonnie Raitt, Brian Wilson, the Stones. If you want to hear my full conversation with Don Was again, you can find it on the CBC Listen app. Stick around, more Q coming up right after this.
And it keeps you moving on, calling you across the board.
This is CBC Radio 1, 88.1 FM and 690 AM in Vancouver.
If one of the unavoidable eventualities of art is to act as social history, what story is being handed down to us?
From acclaimed author Essie Aduja comes a visually stunning cultural critique of the representations of Black people in art and storytelling.
I've always been curious as to why we sideline some stories and mythologize others. What social and political instincts inform our remembering?
Essie Aduja, Out of the Sun on CBC Gem. The news is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Cost of Living with Paul Havershrud. 'Tis the season for big in-person gatherings, conventions, expos, live events where you see actual people. After a 2-year break, they're back. But in a world that's moved online, does being face-to-face still matter?
This is CBC News from Vancouver. Good morning, I'm Drew Karakis. Dozens of firefighters are battling a blaze in Abbotsford that's destroyed part of an apartment complex. The fire is still burning, but it appears to be contained. Officials say people living in roughly 160 units in the complex have been displaced. Other properties around the apartment building were also evacuated. The Chief Darren Lee of the Abbotsford Fire and Rescue Department.
Right now the crews are working to knock down the rest of the pockets of fire in the roof, and then actually transitioned back into the upper floor and trying to just cut off the fire spread right now. And they're doing some removal of some, trying to do some rescues and things like that you can see on this end of the building.
At this point, it doesn't appear anyone was injured, and there's no word yet on how that fire might have started. Abbotsford police are asking displaced residents to register at the Northview Church on Downs Road. The red-hot housing market around the Lower Mainland cooled down somewhat last month. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says sales were just 1.5% above the 10-year sales average for April, well below the record-breaking levels set last year. Still, prices remain high, with the benchmark at more than $1.3 million, up almost 19% from the same month last year. There's concern in the United States that abortion rights for tens of millions of women now hang in the balance. A leaked draft opinion shows the majority of conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court plans to overturn the landmark ruling that legalized abortion in that country almost 50 years ago. Magda Gabriselassie has the latest developments from Washington.
Chief Justice John Roberts said the Supreme Court's draft decision calling for an end to abortion as a federal right is the real deal, but not the final decision. The draft calls for Roe v. Wade to be overturned, leaving it to each state to decide what to do about abortion. Outside the Supreme Court, a large crowd has gathered and reaction is divided.
Roe is unconstitutional. We must uphold the rights of unborn people. More than half of this country will not be able to access life-saving health care. That means those that are banned from accessing abortion will be criminalized.
President Joe Biden released a statement where he says if the court does overturn Roe, it will fall on our nation's elected officials at all levels of government to protect a woman's right to choose. Now, a final decision won't be published until possibly June or July. Magda Gabriselassie, CBC News, Washington.
Overseas, Russian forces are continuing their relentless shelling in parts of southern and eastern Ukraine. But in parts of the country where the Russians have withdrawn, Ukrainian authorities have launched investigations into alleged atrocities committed by Russian troops. Ellen Morrow has more from Kyiv.
Прокурори і слідчі зафіксували застосування ворогом по мирному населенню.
Ukraine's Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova speaking in Irpin, one of the suburbs around Kyiv, devastated by the Russian invasion. She described Russian President Vladimir Putin as the main war criminal of the 21st century.
Russians have done here a lot. They have done here murders. They have done their tortures.
Ukrainian officials are investigating a litany of war crimes accusations against Russian troops. Venediktova accused Russian forces of using rape as a weapon of war. Russia has denied allegations of wrongdoing despite the mountain of evidence that has been piling up for weeks. Putin gave the brigade accused of atrocities in Bucha an honorary title recognizing what he called great heroism. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Kyiv.
And whale researchers say they're excited about a new video that appears to show a calf swimming with members of K-Pod of the endangered southern resident killer whales. The video was shot recently off the Oregon coast. Michael Weiss with the Whale Research Center says K-Pod hasn't produced a new calf in more than a decade. He says it's exciting, but he stresses that researchers still need to confirm that a birth has actually happened. And that's the CBC News from Vancouver. We'll have more news on CBC Radio 1 in half an hour. Taking a look at the weather for Metro Vancouver and the South Coast, a mainly cloudy day today. There's also a chance of showers or some drizzle. Today's high near 14. Periods of rain return tonight with the overnight low near 8. And then tomorrow there's a chance of showers in the morning, but otherwise mainly cloudy. Tomorrow's high up to 12 degrees. And then periods of rain in the forecast for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Right now in Nanaimo, it's 12 degrees and mostly cloudy. 12 and overcast in Vancouver.
You're listening to Q on CBC Radio 1 across Canada and across North America on Sirius XM 169. And from PRX, my name is Tom Power. Welcome back to the show. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Pretty good show today, and we're only still rolling along here. I mean, we still got a half hour left, and we're about to introduce you, if you haven't met her before, or reintroduce you if you have, to one of the most beloved jazz artists in Canadian history. For 3 decades, Diana Krall has been charming audiences all around the world with her beautiful voice, her beautiful piano playing, and for most of that time, she's relied on one producer and collaborator, a mentor and a friend. Tommy LiPuma is a legend in the recording industry. He sold tens of millions of records. He's produced big acts like Miles Davis, and Barbra Streisand, and Bill Evans. Tommy died in 2017, And since then, Diana has been sorting through the music they had made together for one last record. Diana Krall's latest album is called This Dream of You, and it features her collaborator, Tommy LiPuma, for the very last time.
How much do I love you? I'll tell you no lie. How deep is the ocean? How high is the sky? How many times in a day do I think of you?
Diana Krall with How Deep is the Ocean from her latest album, This Dream of You. I spoke to Diana Krall when the album first came out. We talked about finding collaborators and honoring the people who influence you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be talking with you. Feels good to be talking about music.
How Deep is the Ocean? Irving Berlin, right?
Yes, Irving Berlin, who he was one of the few songwriters from that era who wrote both lyrics and music.
You have a way, and you've always had a way of making interesting songwriters who I didn't know were interesting. You know what I mean by that? Like, I think I saw Irving Berlin as sort of, oh yeah, the older kind of, like, I feel like Willie Nelson was kind of like that too. Like, he made some of those old standards or some of the songs of that era more interesting to me and kind of drew out the complexity in them. And it makes me wonder what you might see in some of those songs. Say, for example, How Deep is the Ocean? Like, what do you hear when you listen to that song or when you start to play it?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Willie Nelson because he was just on my mind, always on my mind. Just on my mind like 5 minutes ago. So I'm thinking a lot about Willie. And because there's this radio show I was listening to him where he was sitting with his guitar and he was talking about things. And he was talking about Stardust, about that and or these songs. And I think that Willie just sings them so naturally, and he lived through those songs being sung, and not that was a time where that was a popular song, So he probably learned those songs just by being, that's what you heard on the radio, and you were aware of them, and they were written often at a very, even there were things that were happening. So I think that you can find that kind of feeling in those songs if you want to.
That's so interesting that these songs were written largely during the Depression, or a lot of these songs were written at the beginning of the war, or they were written during times of great economic, like civil unrest, that even though you're hearing, even like if you say Irving Berlin or Gershwin's or something like that, they're upbeat, positive songs, but it doesn't take, I love that it doesn't take much scratching for you to hear the context in which they were written.
No, a lot of those songs, I think, were people drawn to them were because they were about loss. I mean, if you interpret that, if you have the picture of that in your head, you can take it from being, so I love you, I'll tell you no lie. You can play it like that, and it's completely valid. There's nothing wrong with that. I've done it, for years. Or you can sort of like think Leon Russell, or Donny Hathaway. You can kind of I think that there's just ways that some songs are interesting to me in that way, that how they can evolve and change. Sometimes we play them for a long time, and that you don't leave the original intention of the song. You don't just take it and pull it apart till it doesn't even think of it. No, I think that's really important, is that you don't just pull these songs apart just for the sake of pulling them apart.
No, but you get closer to the real thing. Like Stardust is a great example of that. Like when I started playing Stardust and when I started singing Stardust, I realized it was sad. Like I didn't think Stardust was sad before, but I saw it as a song about longing, a song about wishing, a song about someone who's gone, the memory of Love's Refrain. Like they're there. You don't have to really look for it too much.
Yeah, and Autumn in New York is like that too. Like right now, especially, I just collaborated with Mark Seliger. I don't know if you know him. He's a photographer. Been a friend of mine for 20 years now, and we had some footage of New York in the lockdown, and we kind of had to look at it because Autumn in New York why does it seem so inviting? Autumn in New York is often mingled with pain, and isn't that the truth? I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be written yesterday to be current, and at the same time, current songs don't always have to just reflect everything that's happening now. I mean, I think that there's different ways of nothing just has to be always kind of for nostalgic purposes. It's just sometimes it's fun to do things that you're playing and you're thinking about the artists that you honor, the artists that I honor every day, in Oscar Peterson and Nat King Cole and then I like people I'm listening to right now, like Artemis. I really love the Reedy Rosnes and also Terry Lynn Carrington. I'm using instruments for what it has to say. It's not standard repertoire, but it has a lot to say. So just can you find something to say in the standard repertoire that means something to people? It's not just, I think that depends on the listener, and but I think a lot of these songs do have a lot to say that reflect pain and suffering, and sometimes they just make you feel better, and that's okay too,
I mean, that's why they're timeless. I mean, that's why I know that's an overused word, but that they truly are absence of time.
I'd rather have that than covers and kind of, I think that many people have delved into, that I respect, that are songwriters, have gone into Joni Mitchell, who recorded some of my favorite standards records. I think Willie, Joni. I was listening to her singing At Last, and there are lots of artists who sort of put this music beside like their own. Like Joni puts this music beside her own music, or Irving Berlin can stand alongside with Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan or some of my favorite songwriters.
You ever get to talk to Joni?
Yes, I do. I had FaceTime with her, visit with her like a few weeks ago.
No way. How's she doing?
She's great. She's just, I'm just in awe of her always, but she's just as a human being, how she's worked so hard through, life since her aneurysm. She's doing, able to, I think she has lots of people that come over. I know that she's got lots of friends and music in the house, and she's putting a new record out as well, which I've heard, early radio show that was found, and that's exciting. And I think she just got an Instagram account, so she's great.
Do you take influence from her? I was just reading a interview Cameron Crowe and her did in '76, I think.
Yeah.
And it was right when she did the Mingus record. And it was talking about her relationship to jazz, and as a Canadian, her relationship to jazz. Do you take influence from Joni?
I do. I think we all should, and we all do. I always go back to her. I mean, I'm sitting here when I have For the Roses on the top of my piano right now. So I'm always thinking about how she played that, like especially because and I think that it's just the obvious cheese rustling and the bumping of the logs. The moon slipped down. I mean, that song For the Roses is seen as sort of the industry kind of like, wow. But it also refers to the arbutus trees.
Oh, yeah.
Bumping of the logs. And so that speaks to a place that is very dear to me, that she references these things that are close to my heart. And I'm always learning something different or seeing a different line, but also her sense of harmonics,
Yeah, I've always felt like she doesn't get her due as a progression writer. Like I feel like, or her as an instrumentalist, or as a her sense of texture is something that she should get more due for. I
think she's an improviser as well. I think that when she went into the studio, when she was able to just sort of like play, you just work it out and get into a zone. I mean, if you watch Woodstock, the latest Woodstock, where her performance, she sits at a piano like this and she talks about, she's like, I gotta get into my zone, and letting that happen. And she her open tunings, and she's got a unique sense of harmony that kind of like, that's why it works so well with Wayne Shorter. But she's not trying to be anybody else. She's me smiling thinking of it. Like a lot of tryouts over that sound that appeals to me. I kind of like feel that's a very, very wonderful place to access. It must be inspired by.
You met her young too, I bet. Even you, I bet she loved you when you started out. I bet she was happy that there was this Canadian person coming in LA playing jazz.
She's just an amazing, there's amazing perspective as a painter. She has a lot to say. She has a lot to say, and I'm grateful that she's so she's doing okay. We went to an event where I got to sit with her. I was her guest. The table was her, Joni Mitchell, David Hockney, and Robbie Robertson. And I was like, wow.
Yeah, you're Diana Krall though, you know. Like,
there's your brain, you know. It was I was a kid, but it was I think that we're lucky to be able to just have a conversation with people who created an art form, you know, an original, created something that was so deep and beautiful.
Well, I'm glad we're kind of down memory lane a little bit. I want to take a listen to this.
I've got the world on a string, sitting on the rainbow. Got the string around my finger. One world of light. Ooh, I'm in love. I got a song that
If you're just tuning in, I'm Tom Power. This is Q. Diana Krall is my guest. We're talking about her new album, This Dream of You, which stemmed from sessions with her late collaborator and producer, Tommy LaPuma. I want to talk a little bit about that partnership. That was I Got the World on a String, Great Old Standard, from your 95 record, Only Trust Your Heart, first record you made with Tommy. Before I ask you about Tommy, I noticed while we were listening to that, you were going like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, it's like listening to a different person almost, you know. It feels like you're listening to a different person. We were recording to analog, and you know, I was speaking of people being very fortunate to get a chance to hang out with some of the people who created the music. It was Ray Brown for me, who was generous to me to play with me. And at that time, I was just trying to I was listening to Ernestine Anderson and Shirley Horn and wanting to play that music, but there was still a sense of it's hard to listen to that because like I said, it's kind of like I don't go back and listen to my records. I did do that last night. I listened to one piece last night where I was in the middle of the night, I had my headphones on. I often wake up and I got my headphones on and I go brush my teeth and I've got these big headphones on and I'm like, oh, I forgot I've got noise canceling. I just like to walk around with noise canceling headphones. I'm such a night person, so everybody goes to bed and I kind of just wander around, listen to music or play a little bit. I decided, I thought, I'll listen to Departure Bay. I just wanted to go back to that. I've never listened to it. And I thought it was really good. Yeah. And it's like one of the few songs that I can go back to listen to that doesn't make me cringe. That doesn't make me cringe because of the people on it, but sometimes everybody feels that way when you're finding yourself when you're young. It's a normal thing to do is in any art form. I think it's acceptable to say, oh well, you know, but not because of the musicians, but just it sounds so it's just surging, and I might feel that way when I listen to things that I did yesterday too. But yeah. But I did listen to that, and I thought that was something that was very, very. I was okay with that. I thought that was something that I should return to.
What do you remember from first meeting Tommy?
Well, I first met Tommy. This different stories kind of go around, but I was signed to GRP by a gentleman named Carl Griffin.
Yeah.
And Marianne Topper, Carl Griffin, who was at Impulse at that time, brought me to Tommy's attention at that time, so I owe a great deal to Carl Griffin for believing in me and originally having the interest in signing me. And then Tommy was there as a producer. So and then we just became friends because he was not only he introduced me to a lot of art and art and music and wine and just hanging out, especially his work that he did with Charles Gilberto and Klaus. So I think the most important records we did was really Look of Love
Yeah, he seemed to get you. He seemed to get you in a way that other people might not have got you at the time. I read one quote. He said he understood the importance of who I was and who I was evolving into as a woman and as a jazz musician.
Tommy was in Jill, who I still, who I talk to all the time. They're kind of like, they were like very, very important people that they had my. They're like the best parents you could ever imagine, the most healthy sort of, and that doesn't mean we didn't have disagreements, but they really looked out for me and gave me room to do what I wanted to do. And when I, made mistakes, accepted apologies, or I remember, having differences, we always work them out. And Al Schmidt has, and it stays a major part in the team, of me and Tommy and Al and Steve Jenowick. And going back to work with Al, you can't talk about it. You talk about Al Schmidt along with Tommy LaPuma and the work we all did together, because there was Tommy was in this booth. Tommy would stay in the studio. He didn't want to be distracted in the booth, so he put his headphones on and he would be in the room as listening as part of the ensemble, because he didn't want to be behind the glass. He didn't want any kind of distractions. He just wanted to be in the moment. And then he didn't have to say anything. And then we finished playing something, he would look up from his headphones and he'd go, and sometimes he would say nothing more than just one more, or that was great. It wasn't a lot of words. It was just kind of that you had it or you didn't, and then he would kind of have to push you if you're exhausted. And he was the one to say, you know what, let's call it a day and go have a martini.
Yeah, it must be a bit emotional. This is your your buddy. This is your music dad. This is your collaborator, the person who believed in you. You putting this thing out, the last thing you guys did together, it must be a bit emotional, but I can only imagine.
I feel very, very, very good that I can be in a place where I'm not falling apart, because when we did the last record to Turn Up the Quiet, I had to start doing press 10 days after he died. And that was just brutal. It was so, I wasn't even able to know where to start. I didn't know whether I should be talking about him or what happened. So I miss him every day, and I see him, in places, or I feel his presence around. But being able to do this record, I felt like it was time for me to go, okay. Tommy and I talked about But Beautiful, for instance. He was like, babe, you got to put that out. And I'm like, okay, well, next record, I promise. And he did make this promise to me that you're going to finish what we started. And he trusted that I could do it, I could sequence it, and everything that I learned was from him. So, and from a lot of people, but I had to get them out of the vaults, remix, going with Al, and I was able to do so without, it wasn't a grief, kind of process. It was more of I feel this way, but now I got some work to do, and don't want this to be sitting in you have a box of negatives, and I always take photographs. There's all these negatives that I took pictures of, and they're going to, they're going to be away somewhere.
Yeah.
I didn't want them to get lost, and before I move forward in whatever it is I want to do, I felt it was important to have the abundance of music that we had, because we had a lot of music, because we get in the studio, it's super fun, and we have 3 different bands. Now is the time to finish it the way I saw right in honoring Tommy, but also in what I wanted to do as well, and what Tommy and I talked about, just what we talked about, that we have this, and it should be heard now, and I wanted to do it, so it didn't just sit there for 10 years, and all of a sudden, oh gosh, we don't know where it is.
Diana, nice to see you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. I just adore you. Thank you so much.
Oh, I adore you too, buddy. I adore you too.
And thank God I'm still at radio. I listen to radio. Thank God for people like you. And, I love spontaneity of it. I don't know what's coming. I don't know what's happening. It's a beautiful place to be. So, and I was thrilled to talk with you.
Diana, thanks, bye. Take care of yourself.
All right, big hug, big kiss. How long can I stay in this nowhere cafe before night turns into day? I wonder why I'm so frightened of dawn.
which keeps me living on. There's a moment when all old things become new again. But that moment might have come and gone. All I have, all I know, is this dream of you, which keeps me living on. I look away, but I keep seeing. I don't want to believe, but I can't believe. Shadows dance upon the wall. Shadows that seem to know it all. Am I too blind to see? Is my heart playing tricks on me? I'm lost in the crowd. All my tears are gone. All I have, all I know, is this dream that keeps me living on.
That's Diana Krall and This Dream of You. It's the title track off her latest album, which is out everywhere now. That is it for Q today. Meet us back here tomorrow. If you want to relive anything you've heard on the show, or you know someone who didn't get a chance to hear a conversation you think they would love, we would love for you to pass on word about the show by going to cbc.ca/Q, downloading the CBC Listen app, or finding us on Instagram at CBCQ. I'm there at Tom Joe Power. We'll see you soon. Later on.
Good morning. Here are the headlines from the CBC Vancouver newsroom. I'm Matt Humphrey. Firefighters and police in Abbotsford are busy dealing with a large apartment fire. Residents of roughly 160 units were displaced. Nearby buildings to the apartment were evacuated as well. At this point, it appears no one was injured. Abbotsford police are asking anyone displaced by the fire to register at the Northview Church on Downs Road. The fire is along Cardinal Avenue near Mount Lehman Road, and the cause of the fire has yet to be determined. The Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver says home sales in the region fell in April and returned to more historically typical levels for the month. The April sales were 1.5% above the 10-year sales average for the month, far less than the record-breaking numbers we saw last year. And officials say Victoria and New Westminster will have their own mobile crisis teams later this year, similar to the one operating on the North Shore. The team would respond to incidents involving someone suffering from a mental health issue. It's meant as an alternative to police responding to the calls. The team would consist of mental health experts who would provide crisis counseling, among other services. And now the forecast for Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Cloudy today with a chance of drizzle, changing to a chance of showers this afternoon. Highs to 14 degrees. Tonight, we'll see periods of rain before morning, and tomorrow we can expect more clouds and another chance of showers. Right now, you're listening to CBC Radio 1. Coming up on The Cost of Living.
Music is so available to compare. You know what I mean? Everybody has every song on Spotify. Everyone has all these old songs on YouTube. That it's more likely that the comparison will be noticed, first of all, and that you can share it so readily that those things happen. And I think it emboldens lawyers to try to make a play to make some money or get some share of a big hit song that's having some success.
Donovan Woods is a singer-songwriter. If someone sends him a song these days, he doesn't listen to it because he doesn't want to get sued for copyright infringement. Hi, I'm Paul Havershrood. Today on The Cost of Living, we dive into the world of showbiz, baby. Not all of it is bright lights and red carpets. Take the music industry. Sometimes you'll hear a song that sounds a lot like another song. But what if it's a lot? The line between being influenced by a piece of music and ripping it off is now fuzzier than ever. And more of those disputes are ending up in court. Also on the really big show, the battle for our streaming dollars means Hollywood is cranking out more TV and movies than ever before. These are the days of peak content. But could they be numbered? Up first, after a 2-year hiatus, live events are coming back. We visit a comic convention to find out if the personal touch, even in an online world, still matters to what we buy. Do you speak any Klingon? Here's a word. Qapla'. It means success. Qapla'. This is what comic book conventions across the country are hoping to find. Comic-Cons, fan expos, whatever you call them. Tens of thousands of fans show up, line up, to see their favorite characters.
Trailer Park Boys, Group 1, you're down line 13. Group 2, you're down line 11. Line 11. Sean Astin, you're down line number 9.
Like so many live events, Comic-Cons have taken a 2-year break. Now, they're back.
It makes the world feel normal again, right? Like you kind of get out to do the things that you like to do, want to do, and are able to do, and be around people again. I think that's what we all missed during COVID is human interaction. I think the best part of the Calgary Comic Expo is seeing everybody else in costumes. Some of the people that are like, oh my God, look at the effort that you put in, and vice versa, right? There's some people that you see and you're kind of like, oh wow, I wish I thought to do that too.
Everyone won't stop taking my pictures. They say I'm cute and cuddly and wow.
What stars do you want to meet?
Guardians of the Galaxy and The Walking Dead, as long as I don't end up dead.
I think you'll be okay.
I love it. I get in shock when it comes to celebrities and seeing the shops and everything. Everything here is fantastic.
Those are fans of the recent Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. The cute and cuddly one who keeps getting her picture taken, she's wearing a dress made of Beanie Babies. After 2 years away, she is raring to make up for lost time. And there is pent-up demand for whatever. Hobbits, Tribbles, Mandalorians. Bring it on.
I'd say that I probably spent more this year than I would normally. It always does depend on like who's the actors and who's coming and kind of the stars of the show. I think one of the choices, I guess, why I opted to go with the cast for The Lord of the Rings as well is normally I usually go towards the like animated voice actors and stuff like that.
Was it worth the money?
It was, yeah.
Anis Adari is our resident Star Trek expert. He toured the Calgary Expo talking to fans, artists, vendors. He wanted to see what's been missing for the last 2 years. What he found? Being face-to-face, or Vulcan ear to Vulcan ear, as it were, still matters.
I'm Aaron Reynolds. I write a comic strip called Effin' Birds. I think that the thing about Comic-Con and Calgary Expo and all these kinds of shows is that they are a far wider bigger net than any of the other kinds of like the one-of-a-kind show or something like that. The one-of-a-kind show is, a place for artists who are making very specific kinds of art to sell their stuff. And at a show like Calgary Expo, you have artists, you have, people who draw or write comic books, you have people who make television programs and movies, you have people who love anime, you have people you have so many different fandoms that come together that, there's a space for almost everything here. Like, I know people who come to these shows who sell soap. They sell customized soap, and they do great. And
is it at least like soap in the shape of the Death Star or something?
Yes. Actually, soap in the shape of a stormtrooper's head. That was my favorite one.
Prior to group 4, you're in line number 4. Group 5, you're line number 5 for the 4 models.
What difference does it make to your business to be able to come back to these events in person?
Well, part of what makes these events amazing is that you grow your audience at them. So it's not just a place where you are selling stuff and making money, but it is a place where you are making new fans that will then, buy something from you later, And so every show that I do, I see a big uptick in social media following and stuff like that. And my whole business is built on getting people to read the comic every day until they find the specific comic that they love so much that they must own it on a t-shirt or a mug or something like that.
What have you seen in terms of sales so far? Has it been better than you expected? Worse? What's it been like?
So this has been considerably better than I expected. I just did Toronto Comic Con a few weeks ago, and it was about, I would say it was 75-80% of what a show was pre-pandemic, and that was good. I was satisfied with that, and I used that as my bar for what I should order for this show and what I should bring with me. And I'm going to be sold out of most of my merchandise by midday on Saturday. So it's been a great show. We have 4 hours left on Friday still, and I'm almost out of books.
Love the costume.
Thank you. I'll be back. I want to talk to you guys actually.
My name is Nick Johnson. I've been doing this for 20 years. The first show I did was when I was 18 in my 12th year of high school.
Wow. What has changed over those 20 years?
The first shows that I did were very small, very quiet, and typically you'd have maybe a table or two of people making comics and selling their own comics, and then big tables of back issue bins full of old comics, and there'd really just be like a small group of comic enthusiasts who'd root through back issues. Some of them would talk to you, most of them wouldn't, and they were very small, slow, kind of drab affairs.
And this is not a drab affair, and this is not small.
Well, I've always saw the conventions as the icing on the cake. You create comics in solitude generally. There's a little bit of a community, but mostly you don't see people when you're working on these. So to be able to be back amongst people who really engage with this kind of stuff and who can celebrate their loves together and dress up together, it's really the reason that we're doing all this in the first place. It's to make connections and to relate to each other. So it means a hell of a lot.
So was there an emotional gap for you when you couldn't come to conventions like this?
Yes. And at some point it sort of feels like, why am I still making work if no one's going to see it, no one's going to read it?
I assume you have an online presence. How did that supplement or replace coming to conventions like this when they weren't running?
Yeah, I really had to lean hard on the idea of making digital comics and finding avenues to get those digital comics into people's hands or computers, if you will. There were a few comic conventions that went completely online, and I would get a table, quote unquote, at those. And of course, the experience is never going to quite match up to that, but it was interesting to put myself into that virtual realm just to see how things worked and if they did work.
Did it work? Did you make any money at those?
Very little. I feel like it was one of those cases where you'd get a few extra hits on your website, and I did sell some digital comics, but in general, a lot of people said, cool, thanks, Nick. I'll wait for the physical one to come out. And so even at this con, people were like, yes, the book has been printed. I'm going to pick it up today. People just still want to hold it in their hands.
Artists and vendors at this year's Calgary Expo, speaking to our producer, Anissa Darby. And yes, if you're wondering, Anise did leave with another model of the Starship Enterprise to add to his collection. And a tribble. final frontier. These are the voyages of the cost of living. I'm Paul Haverstrood. A few years back, Lady Gaga got into a flap with Madonna. Her song Born This Way sounded a bit too much like Madge's Express Yourself. They managed to keep the lawyers out of it. Led Zeppelin wasn't so lucky. It was in court for years over who actually wrote Stairway to Heaven. Talk about a bustle in your hedgerow. These days, copyright lawsuits like that are becoming more commonplace, and they're targeting some of the world's biggest artists. Our producer Jennifer Keane looks at why.
Singer-songwriter Donovan Woods often goes down to Nashville to write music with other artists. And he says they're always on guard. They need whatever they're working on to sound original.
There is certainly, like, in a writer's room when you're writing, there's oftentimes somebody will stop and say, we're on something. And that's how they put it.
That means the song they're working on is starting to sound like one that already exists. It's a hazard of the music business, and it's getting harder to avoid.
Music is so available to compare. Everybody has every song on Spotify. Everyone has all these old songs on YouTube. That it's more likely that the comparison will be noticed, first of all, and that you can share it so readily that those things happen. And I think it emboldens lawyers to try to make a play to make some money or get some share of a big hit song that's having some success.
Copyright lawsuits have been around as long as pop music, but the last few years have been something else. The Weeknd, Lizzo, Nickelback, Justin Bieber, they've all been sued by other artists. Ed Sheeran, who's been sued more than once, says these claims are out of control and need to stop. But where did it all start?
Everybody get up.
Remember Blurred Lines? It was one of 2013's biggest hits. The beginning sounds a bit like an old Marvin Gaye song. The estate of Marvin Gaye sued the writers of Blurred Lines. It claimed they copied not the melody, but the vibe. The estate won, and the lines around copyright law got a lot blurrier.
I think a lot of people are realizing the value of a hit song, and you see the amounts that people are paying for music catalogs like Bob Dylan's catalog, and the ability to monetize a song, the underlying composition, has never in some ways been greater.
Paul Van Watt is a professional musician and entertainment lawyer in Toronto.
And so as people realize the amount of value in being a songwriter, or treated as a songwriter, that's going to lead to more people staking a claim in music.
Another reason? There is just so much music out there. 60,000 songs are uploaded to Spotify every day. Donovan Woods thinks cases like the one against Blurred Lines are nonsense. Actually, he uses a word I can't say on the radio.
There's a million songs that sound like that. And it's happening the same to that Dua Lipa song, Levitating, right now.
It's facing 2 copyright lawsuits.
Yeah, there's a scale in that song.
If you wanna run away with me, I know a galaxy and I can take you for a ride.
It's a scale.
You want me, I want you, baby.
It's like, there will be some other songs that include a scale. Yeah, it's like suing a writer for using the alphabet. You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense.
I'm levitating.
Some copyright claims are legit. Donovan gets that. But all this arguing over who wrote what, it's kind of missing the point. Because a hit song, he says, it's about more than just a song.
A hit song is the convergence of the right artist with the right song, with the right production, with the right timing. It's just impossible to repeat. It happens so infrequently. It's just like there are too many intangible things to ever. These people, the people that are suing somebody, they say, "Oh, we have a song like that," and it didn't make any money for a reason. It wasn't the same song. It's not the same song.
Well, tell it to the judge, I guess. For the cost of living, I'm Jennifer Keane.
This is the cost of living. I'm Paul Havershrud. 57 channels, and there's nothing on. Springsteen sang that in the 1980s. Today, the boss might change his tune. The so-called streaming wars mean we are waist deep in content. Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, HBO Max, Apple TV are all throwing scads of money at movies and TV shows. The goal is to dethrone Netflix. And Netflix may finally be cracking. The latest numbers showed Netflix lost 200,000 subscribers to start the year. More importantly, it expects to lose another 2 million in the next few months. Its share price has cratered, falling 70%. So what happens to Netflix, the rest of the streaming industry, and all that content being cranked out if Netflix is no longer growing? Peter Labuza is a lecturer at San Jose State University, where he teaches about the financial side of Hollywood. He joins us now. Hi, Peter.
Hey, happy to be here.
Let's start with what's happening at Netflix. It now expects to lose 2 million subscribers over the next few months. Is this a big deal?
I think it is a big deal. Netflix, since it debuted its streaming service, has had continual growth. Now, that growth has been largely plateauing in the United States and Canada, but obviously one of the biggest expansions for Netflix in the last half decade has been its international territory. So we think of TV shows like Squid Game or Money Heist, and these huge growth markets that have been particularly in Asia, Latin America, and parts of Europe. And what Netflix is seeing in some of its numbers is even those numbers are plateauing. And a lot of this has to do with the growing competition in the streaming market, the rise of Disney and Disney Plus, the rise of HBO Max, and some of these other large conglomerates that have really been able to figure out their streaming platforms in the last 2 to 3 years. And now consumers, I think, are seeing these sort of options and choices and making the decisions to not go with Netflix.
Okay, so if growth is plateauing for Netflix, what types of things might change now?
Firstly, they're going to start pulling back on production. Netflix has been spending 17 to 20 billion dollars a year in just original productions, which is a very, very high number in terms of the industry. And it's produced a lot of shows that simply don't hit, and they have to cancel after 1 or 2 seasons. The other thing that Ted Sarandos, the co-CEO of Netflix, along with Reed Hastings, announced is that they are looking into and planning an ad tier based subscription service. So instead of paying whatever it's, $20 a month, you might be able to pay closer to $10 a month and then watch ads either during the TV shows or before. The plans on how to exactly work the ad market hasn't been decided. It will be a 2 to 3 year process, but that's going to be the huge major changes that we're going to see as Netflix really tries to figure out what it really wants to be if it can't simply continue to grow.
When you start talking about growth and what a company like Netflix wants to be, of course, Netflix is a Silicon Valley company. I think people think of it as an entertainment provider. But when you think of Netflix, is Netflix an entertainment company or a tech company?
I think it started as a tech company, right? When we think about Netflix's origins, right? Disrupting Blockbuster Video and these other, mega chain stores. It was so easy to just get your DVDs in the mail, not have to deal with late fees. And then when they developed their streaming company, right? They originally started as a platform for films and television. They just licensed content from the other major Hollywood studios. So places like Disney and Universal and Paramount, and all these television shows. And then when Netflix really decided to get into the production game around 2013 with House of Cards, they were really taking a bet that their data had a way of disrupting the way that Hollywood works. There's a famous quote by screenwriter William Goldman that nobody knows anything, that, you know, it's impossible to predict what's going to be a hit in the industry. And Netflix was trying to argue to its shareholders, we actually have the data to, re-engineer that market, that we will be able to know what can be hits. In order to continue the growth that it's had, that its investors have essentially wanted for the last decade, they've needed to produce hit after hit. But because they have to produce so much content to figure out which of those are going to be a hit, there's a lot of worries within the shareholder community of whether that's a sustainable growth model. As long as the numbers have continued to grow in terms of subscribers, Netflix investors have been happy with this ridiculously overpriced growth model that has allowed it to dominate Hollywood. And now that they're seeing that there might be some sort of peak for those numbers, I think there's a lot of questions of how much content is too much content, really.
I'm curious about this time we're in right now. You know, we're in this time of what's called peak content. There's so much stuff out there to watch. If we look at just television alone, more than 550 scripted shows were available to watch last year, which is double the number of shows we saw a decade ago. Is this sustainable?
I really don't think it's sustainable. And I think it's really bad in a lot of ways. And in some ways it's good, right? There's a lot of creators who are getting opportunities for the first time, but we know that this sort of crunch is coming because there's these shows that are getting released and it's so hard to get anyone to know about them. One of the biggest complaints from Netflix creators is the fact that they don't really provide the publicity and advertising budget to get their shows out there, to even get people to know their name, the names of the shows. I just realized 2 days ago that there was a remake of a David Bowie film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, that I'm a big fan of. And I'm the target audience for this. It stars Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's a great actor. I should be number one in line to know about this show, and I had no idea. And so I think there's an issue at the core of this peak TV moment where there's a lot of money being thrown toward content production, but actually not toward content reception. And I think one of the issues that the entire industry is going to have to deal with is how do we actually get people to know about these shows? How do we get people to subscribe? And how do we balance this market in a way that makes sense? I think there's a lot of competition right now in the streaming market, but it's a lot to do with the future of what television might look like as opposed to our present moment.
You know, it does sound like you're saying, hey, change is coming because too much money was being spent here. Content was getting lost. We had all of these scripted shows spending, millions and millions of dollars on it. But if this change is coming, I do wonder if this moment right now, we're seeing Netflix finally see a drop in subscribers instead of these continuous gains. I mean, is this really the canary in the coal mine kind of moment?
I think for Netflix, it's definitely in a canary in the coal mine moment of really figuring out what they want to be as a company. There was a real sense, I think, for the last 5 years that Netflix was kind of undefeatable as this, it was the first streaming company. It really established itself. It has the majority of the market when it comes to streaming. And now we're going to start to see how everyone else plays in that market as well and what those changes are going to be. So I think when we think about what does Netflix look like going forward, I think a lot of the things like advertising that they said they would never do, we're going to start to see them do the things that have defined traditional film and television studios for decades. And so Netflix will be around to stay. It's not about to die. It's certainly still the biggest power player in the industry. I think there's just going to be a lot of questions of how much it starts to really resemble everyone else in the industry.
Well, Peter Labuza, thank you so much for taking us through all that.
Thank you.
Peter Labuza lectures on Hollywood finance at San Jose State. On last week's show, we debated the merits of going back to the office versus working from home. Here are some of your thoughts.
Hey there. My name is Alex Wright, and, I work as a baker right now, so it's really hard for me to do remote working. but I am also a student, and we had to do online for 6 months until the last 2 months when we've been able to have some mixed classes where we finally got together to work on projects, and it has made a world of difference to be able to actually work with my classmates and see their faces and see their reactions, not over just text or anything. It just makes working together way easier.
Hi, this is Sherry calling from Vancouver. I just listened to your thing about, is it better to be back at the office or is it better to be working from home? It's going to vary greatly depending on the person's situation. And I think a hybrid model is by far the smartest way for an employer to go, or to at least entertain, or you're going to have a lot of dissatisfaction that really I think is hard to justify and is unnecessary.
Hi, my name is Connor, and I've been working from home since 1997. I just wanted to point out, when your guests were listing all of the benefits of coming back to the office versus all the costs of coming back to the office, all of the benefits of coming back to the office were for the company, and all of the costs of coming back to the office were for the individual. For example, the individual has to shoulder the extra cost and time expense of commuting, all of the wardrobe, all of the meals and expenses, where the company is the one that reaps the benefit of the added collaboration and creativity, since they reap all of the rewards of the work product. So just wanted to point that out, and yeah, great show. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thanks for that, Connor. And thanks for calling. If you hear something on the show and want to give us a call, the number is 1-866-550-COST.
If you wanna run away with me, I know a galaxy and
That's 1-866-550-2678. Or email costofliving@cbc.ca.
glitter in my eyes, shining slowly in the back. If you're feeling like you need a little bit of company, you met me at the perfect time. You want me, I want you, baby. My sugar boo, I'm levitating.
That's the show for this week. You can find links to our Facebook and Twitter on our show page, cbc.ca/costofliving. Follow our podcast anywhere you get podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, CBC Listen app. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. Our producers are Anissa Dari, Daniel Nerman, and Jennifer Keane. Our executive producer is Tracy Johnson. I'm Paul Havertrude. Thanks for listening.
I'm levitating. I believe it's just for me, I feel it in our energy, I see it's written in the stars. We can go wherever, so let's do it now or never, baby, nothing's ever too far. Glitter in the sky, glitter in the eyes, shining just the way we are. I feel like we're forever every time we get together, but whatever, let's get lost on Mars. You want me?
This is CBC Radio 1, 88.1 FM and 690 AM in Vancouver.
I'm Elamin Abdul Mahmoud. Every week I'm joined by writers Anil Niazi and Kevin Fallon to unpack the hot gossip and biggest culture stories of the week. There is just way content to contend with, so let us help you stay on top of culture news and prioritize those essential reads and watches. Come for the insight, and I promise you will want to stay for the laughs. Pop Chat, Friday afternoon at 1:30 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
I'm Michelle Elliott. Coming up, long lineups at airport security, all due to staffing shortages. Have you been stuck in the line? What can be done about the widespread labor shortage? And the census showed us Canada's population is aging. Is our healthcare system ready? BC Today begins after the news.
This is CBC News from Vancouver.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Zimmerman. It appears everybody has managed to get out safely as the fire quickly spread through an Abbotsford apartment building this morning. Amber Goyer was one of the people inside when flames moved through the building along Mount Lehman Road.
All of a sudden I hear screaming happening on my floor. People are running, pounding on all the doors. I said we had to run now. So I get my daughter and my dog. I didn't have time to get my two cats. I was happy our two still in there. And I didn't get anything. And so I just ran to the closest fire exit. We were trying to make sure everyone didn't take the elevator because some seniors were panicking wanting to get into the elevator. I got down we took the staircase, get down to the third floor. I looked, black smoke all in that floor. I believe that's where the fire started. On the end is on the third floor. A we got out the building, I thought maybe it was going to be contained, but now the whole building, our whole building, everyone is without home right now. There's water pouring out every suite, and my cats are still in there, same with lots of my other neighbors' cats.
There are no reports of any injuries at this point. Surrounding buildings also had to be evacuated. Those people displaced are being asked to register at Northview Church on Downs Road. There's no word yet on a cause. BC is expanding use of the system it uses to issue alerts and warnings across the province. The CBC's Belle Puri has the details.
Alert Ready warns British Columbians of emergency hazards via intrusive messages on television, radio, and cell phones. Now the BC government is expanding its use. Beyond tsunami warnings and amber alerts, the system will also broadcast imminent threats of flooding. This past fall, the government was criticized for not warning Fraser Valley residents before devastating floods hit the Sumas Prairie. Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth said then and now it's up to local governments and First Nations to ask for an alert-ready broadcast.
That being said, the province will also have the ability, if necessary, if we become aware of a situation, to be able to override and to put out an alert.
By June, Alert Ready will also be online to warn of imminent wildfire danger. Tomorrow, just before 2 in the afternoon, BC will conduct a test of the wireless alerting system. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
And now to the United States.
Comes the law, and if what is written is what remains, it goes far beyond the concern of whether or not there is the right to choose. It goes to other basic rights.
President Joe Biden says a woman's right to choose is fundamental, but for millions of women in the U.S., that choice is now at stake. A leaked draft opinion from the Supreme Court indicates it may overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling that legalized abortion nationwide. At the U.S. Senate, opinions are divided along party lines.
A vote on this legislation is not an abstract exercise. This is as urgent and real as it gets.
Court should tune out the bad faith noise and feel completely free to do their job.
Democrats vow to protect abortion rights while Republicans condemn the leak of the draft. If the precedent set in 1973 is overturned, states would be free to set their own rules. The Supreme Court is due to announce its final decision in June or early July. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the right to choose is a woman's right and a woman's right alone. In a statement posted on Twitter, Trudeau says every woman in Canada has a right to a safe and legal abortion. In Ukraine, Russian rockets being launched targeting that massive steel plant in Mariupol. The last remaining Ukrainian defenders inside say Russia troops have launched an all-out assault on their stronghold. A Ukrainian commander says the offensive involves armored vehicles, tanks, and large numbers of infantry. On the weekend, some 100 civilians were brought to safety from the complex, but hundreds more are still there, hiding in a maze of underground shelters. And a young girl in Changsha, China has been found alive after being trapped in a collapsed building for more than 3 days. That's a member of the search and rescue crew saying the preteen girl was found on the first floor of the 6-story building. She is now in hospital in stable condition. 23 people remain missing. The owner of the building is among 9 people charged with numerous building code violations. It's coming up to 12:05, and that's the CBC Noon News from Vancouver. A quick look at the forecast. On the north coast, rain tapering off this afternoon, then a chance of showers. Windy as well with a high of 9. Highs reaching 13 with increasing cloudiness in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a chance of showers with a high of 12 degrees. Highs in the low 20s with lots of sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly sunny with a high of 21. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, a chance of showers this afternoon. Windy in some areas with a high of 13. Rain starting tonight. I'll have more local news at the bottom of the hour. Now over to Michelle with BC Today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Long lineups to get through security at airports in Vancouver, Kelowna, and across the country. Some travelers even missing their flights. Have you been caught up in those waits? And like so many other sectors, staffing shortages are to blame. So what can be done about the widespread labor shortage? After 12:30, the latest census numbers shed light on Canada's aging population. Is our healthcare system ready? What are your biggest healthcare concerns as you get older? I'm Michelle Elliott. This is BC Today. If you are heading to the airport to catch a flight, go early and be ready for long waits. That's the advice from officials after long lineups at security screening led to hours-long waits, missed flights, and frustrated travelers. Here's what CBC heard from passengers at the airport.
I should be flying right now. I missed my flight. It's leaving right now, and they had to give me a flight in an hour.
It's 11:39. Like, I'm here early. I never wait till the last minute, but this is insane. Checked in my baggage, and this is the line to get through security. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get there in time. They better wait for me.
Some frustrated voices of passengers at YVR, and officials there say the delays this past week were the longest ever seen. And so their advice: arrive 2 hours early for domestic flights and 3 hours earlier for international